Chapter 919. In the bottomless abyss, the monstrous demons were created from ordinary original demons. Generally speaking, when a powerful demon temporarily needed a group of cannon fodder soldiers to add to his army, and there happened to be no suitable demon group around, he would use the original demons to create monstrous demons as a replacement. It was said that the process of creating monstrous demons was so simple that it only needed to exert enough distortion and torture on the original demon's body. It was so simple that powerful demons could do it with their eyes closed. Because in the process of evolution, they experienced extreme pain and distortion. So after the monstrous demons completed their evolution, they would have a strong desire to vent the hatred in their hearts. They longed to inflict the pain they had experienced on others. The original demon that appeared in the prison, due to its weak body, was also seriously injured in the process of killing other inmates. It met the requirements of the evolution ritual of physical distortion and became Tana-Ri, which was stronger than the dretch that the original demon could usually evolve into and was also at the bottom of the abyss despise chain. He stretched out two arms of varying thickness and tore open the elm door with his claws. He escaped from the prison that was only left with flesh and bones and ran to the exit of the prison. In the process of escaping, he killed 3 prison guards in a row and snatched the machetes in their hands. Because monstrous demons like monstrous demons had a stubborn desire to collect weapons, he held a machete in each of his 2 palms of different sizes and held one in his mouth. But just as he was about to run out of the prison, he encountered a whole team of garrison troops that came to support him. Without even thinking, the monstrous Tana-Ri demon, who had just evolved, used a newly mastered spell-like ability on the enemy, fear. As the name suggested, it was a spell that struck fear into the hearts of the enemy. In the eyes of the garrison troops of Bite City, this monstrous demon had become a powerful monster with 3 heads and 6 arms. Accompanied by a shrill howl, the monstrous demon quickly jumped into the group of soldiers and waved his machete for a while. Although he was not proficient in the technique, his pliers' proficiency ability was enough to deal with those mortal soldiers. As long as the 2 machetes were crossed, they would most likely be able to remove the weapon in a person's hand. Every time a weapon landed at the foot of the deformed demon, this fellow would throw away the scimitar in its hand with all its might and pick up a new weapon. And at this time, his throwing specialty came into play. Although the trajectory of the throwing scimitar was difficult to grasp, the deformed fiend could always hit the target. In addition to this monstrous demon, there were also sucker demons, dretch demons, twister demons, quassits demons, ripper demons, water lizard demons, vrock demons, bloodhoof demons, bubu demons, swift rats, iron rider demons, sturdy demons, evil spirit demons, flaming demons. They were born one after another. In Pharaoh and Mako's royal hunting ground, there were even bloodlion demons and water eel demons. Even if the lucky ones who could get rid of the original demon form and successfully complete the transformation were 1 in 100, the number of original demons that the Abyss had thrown into Bite City was in the hundreds. The entire Bite City suddenly had hundreds of thousands of different kinds of mid-level and low-level Tana-Ri demons. If they were of the same species, it might be easier to deal with them. The key was that those demons had evolved from original demons and were greatly affected by the environment. Different types of Tana-Ri demons had very different forms and habits, and their innate spells were also very different. The chaos and disasters they caused were far more than just numbers. Bite City, which was full of demons, seemed to have become a miniature version of the Abyss for a while. To be honest, this situation not only shocked the rulers of the Medici Empire led by Pharaoh and Mako, but even Inigo, who was commanding Flinder Knolls and Abyss ghouls to attack the city, was surprised. It was just that the former was frightened, while the latter was pleasantly surprised. The Knoll god never expected that the more than 30 giant vulture demons that he summoned with a secret method and performed a dance of destruction could create such an amazing result. As a demon lord, for a moment, he even felt the rise of chaos and the advancement of evil. This material plane is really destined to be with me. If I occupy this city, I will be rewarded by the Abyss consciousness. Thinking of this, the gnoll's eyes turned red. Chapter 9:20. As the abyss ghouls continued to dig underground, there were already 9 large gaps in the outer wall. Some of the gaps were as long as 30 yards, and most of them were on the eastern wall of Bite City. That area was the closest to the bazaar, which was the commercial district. Several Khedive's camps were temporarily stationed in this area. After the abyss demon miasma broke out in the city, the Imperial Guards not only had to deal with the most serious original demons, but also had to divide their forces to suppress several Khedive's camps. Pharaoh and Mako were on the front line with a group of nobles and ministers. Even Belabey, who was already over 80 years old, was on the top of the city wall. He ordered his subordinates and servants to support the defenders, using wooden fences to block the gaps little by little, and using temporary wooden ramparts to block the gaps caused by the collapse of the city wall. The framework of this makeshift rampart was a combination of wooden beams and stone padding from the collapsed walls, with all the materials available at hand: wood, twigs, bundles of reeds, and gravel, and earth to fill in the gaps. Gradually, the wooden ramparts were piled up to the same height as the original city wall, and the top was wide enough to serve as a good platform for fighting. Wooden barrels and wicker baskets filled with soil were placed at the top of the ramparts to provide protection for the defenders. Compared with the stone city wall, this kind of fortification could better absorb the impact of artillery shells. It was obvious that the nobles and ministers of the Medici Empire also had a certain understanding of military technology. However, the Gnoll's army did not have any cannons at all. At most, they only had a few flintlock rifles. Occasionally, some smart guys would figure it out and fire a few bullets to listen to the sound. Even so, the nobles and officials still recruited some commoners to join them, and they worked hard without stopping for a moment. Although the enemy did not have cannons to destroy the city, the tireless ghouls underground were really dedicated to their work. They were like worker ants, digging everywhere under the command of the higher-level abyss ghouls, and they would easily cause a section of the city wall to collapse. At this time, manpower was needed to repair and expand the wall. Pharaoh had already ordered the black-robed sorcerers to stop using their spells. It was not that the obsidian magic orbs were insufficient, but Mako was vaguely worried that these demons had some more deadly tricks up their sleeves. He had to conserve his sorcerer's strength so that they could be used as a backup when the time came. There were men, women, and even children participating in the labor. They were all recruited from the nearby streets. To be honest, there were hundreds of thousands of Tana-reaped demons roaming around in Bite City. It was safer for them to work under the supervision of the Imperial Guards than to stay at home. Therefore, when the adults were conscripted, they would bring their children with them instead of leaving their empty homes. They carried stones, lumber, carts of earth, twigs, and cut vines to the front. The destruction and repair of fortifications was clearly an endless cycle, exhausting and exhausting. Fortunately, the enemy did not understand artillery technology. Currently, the Jackalan's long-range attacks were limited to shooting with a few captured flintlock rifles, throwing javelins, and shooting arrows with bows. With the garrison troops on the city wall using long-range weapons to suppress and strafe, the Jackalans were basically unable to threaten the civilians who participated in the labor. But when the battle fell into a stalemate, an angry roar suddenly sounded from the Gnoll army outside the city. Yenigu issued a new combat order. The charging Flinder Gnolls retreated like a receding tide, replaced by an endless horde of ghouls in the line of sight of the defenders. Judging from their clothes and appearance, these ghouls were obviously not abyss ghouls. They were all poor people in the cities that had been slaughtered by the Gnoll army before. Some of them were even alive, but they were surrounded by undead monsters around them. They could only stagger towards the city wall of Bite City helplessly. It turned out that Yenigu still had a backup plan. After seeing the strength of the garrison of Métis, he immediately mobilized the ghouls who were still foraging, hunting, and transforming into new people in the rear land to gather in Bite City. After more than a day of trekking, hundreds of thousands of new ghouls finally arrived here in the middle of the night. At a glance, the endless ghouls swarmed towards the city wall like a new tide. When they approached the trenches outside the city, these undead monsters did not even jump through like the gnolls. Instead, they fell straight into the trenches and gradually filled the trenches with their huge numbers. The ghastly white flesh, the jagged bodies, and the mournful roars made the guards on the city wall tremble with fear. Due to the permeation of the aura of the bottomless abyss, a heavy snow had just fallen in Bite City. Every garrison on the city wall was freezing. They lit many bonfires to warm themselves. And when this huge number of undead monsters approached the city wall, the bonfires seemed to be dyed into a strange color by the surging death aura. The sudden condensed frost climbed all the way up the city wall. Fire the cannons. Don't let them get close to the city wall. The old but strong Bella Bay leaned on a battlement. He just glanced down the city wall and immediately ordered, "Spray black oil into the trenches and burn those bodies. Black robe magic, prepare. Gray robe mages, cast courage and protection from the undead on the garrison. Hurry, hurry, hurry." In sharp contrast to his anxious voice, the ghouls under the city wall walked in an orderly manner like a well-trained army. Following Bay's orders, many bronze pipes extended from the top of the city wall. Sticky black oil gushed out from the pipes and covered the trenches below. Lit grass balls were thrown down by the garrison from a high place. They hit the black oil and ignited a raging fire. The smell of barbecued meat suddenly rose in the trenches, but it was also mixed with a disgusting burnt smell. At the same time, bursts of magic light exploded on the garrison on the city wall. It was the gray robe mages who made their move. Although they were not as powerful as their black robe peers, they had no problem casting auxiliary spells such as courage and protection from the undead. In addition to the massive supply of obsidian magic beads, in just half an hourglass, the garrison was all protected by magic. Courage could strengthen a person's will. Protection from the undead could increase a person's resistance to the dark corrosion damage emitted by the undead. The combination of the two was definitely not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. From this, it could be seen that although Bella Bay had a bad reputation of being greedy for money and power, he was indeed somewhat knowledgeable and decisive. It was just that, following the proactive response of the garrison, the undead creatures under the city wall also made corresponding changes. The abyss ghouls and liches that were previously hiding among the ordinary ghouls quickly revealed themselves. They uttered inhuman incantations. One by one, the ghouls stained with black oil and burning with raging flames immediately climbed up, opened their arms, and hugged each other tightly. The flames burned their dead flesh with crackling sounds, and the stinky corpse oil flowed freely. Due to the suppression of the abyss ghouls and liches, when the flames subsided, the corpse oil solidified into a wax-like substance, sticking these ghouls together. Then, new flaming fire ghouls climbed on top of their heads. Following the same pattern, they piled up layer by layer into a spectacular tower of corpses. Because of the increased weight, the ghouls in the territory were even crushed to the point that their original shapes could not be seen. When the corpses were piled high enough, a strong abyss ghoul would leap up and push down this tower of corpses, making it fall towards Bite City and form a siege ladder made of corpses. This time, without waiting for Bella Bay's order, the black-robed mage on the city wall immediately grabbed a handful of dried bat dung and cast a fireball spell, throwing it at the siege ladders. Banging sounds of explosions were constantly heard. Due to the different landing points of the fireball spell and the different strength of the corpses that formed the siege ladders, some of the ladders could be destroyed with only one fireball spell, while others needed 2 or 3 fireballs to succeed. In addition to the black-robed mage, the garrison also bombarded the siege ladders with cannons. Heavy cannons were not easy to deal with targets that were so close to the city wall, so they were mainly responsible for bombarding the rear of the ghoul army, as well as the abyss ghouls and liches that had exposed their positions. The ones responsible for targeting the siege ladders were small-caliber steel cannons and mortar cannons with curved bullet tracks. Iron and lead bullets whizzed through the air and smashed into the undying monsters, tearing their bodies apart. However, there were too many ghouls in this group after all. Also, Although lead bullets and steel bullets could break the bodies of the undead monsters, the undead creatures that were only scratched wouldn't immediately lose their combat ability like mortals. As long as their heads weren't smashed and their main limbs weren't damaged, they could still march firmly toward the city wall. Not only that, but some of the siege ladders were not destroyed immediately due to the tricky locations of the ladders. The surrounding ghouls would step on each other crazily, or even crawl on other people's bodies, trying to get up the siege ladders. Sometimes, they would even add themselves to the siege ladders, forming a pyramid made entirely of human flesh. The other ghouls desperately tried to climb to the top of the wall. Some of them climbed up the wall and madly charged the garrison. Hand-to-hand combat broke out on the platform of the city wall. The ghouls and the garrison were killing each other. There was no way to provide support with cannons, so whether the ghouls could defeat the garrison or be thrown off the wall depended on the impact of their bodies and the close combat. At the foot of the wall, the unlucky garrison that was pulled off the wall by the ghouls but did not fall to their deaths because they fell on the soft meat cushions. They staggered and crawled, shouting, cursing, and slashing. Corpses and dying people were everywhere. Abandoned weapons, helmets, scarves, and shield were everywhere. Chapter 9:21. The situation of the battle changed rapidly. Sometimes, the ghouls climbed up the city walls and ramparts in large groups, forcing their way forward without wavering. Sometimes, they were fiercely repelled. The fierce battle lasted for about 2 hourglasses. All the bonfires on the city walls that the ghouls had rushed up were smashed apart and extinguished. Everything around him was dark and chaotic. The noise of the battle was deafening. The sound of war drums, flutes, cymbals, and alarm bells rose and fell one after another. It was heart-wrenching, coupled with the whooshing sound of arrows, the loud sound of cannons shaking the earth, and the low roar of flintlocks. It seemed that the air was torn apart. From time to time, swords and swords collided fiercely with shields, making crisp sounds. The sound of blades cutting throats, arrows piercing into chests, lead bullets shattering ribs, and stones smashing into heads was much lower. Some of the Medici defenders raised their flags high in the darkness with hope. The smoking torches illuminated their bearded faces and armor. Within a few seconds of the cannons firing, the fire illuminated the gunners' figures. The flintlocks emitted small tongues of fire, tearing the night apart. The defenders had no time to pump black oil to burn the enemies in the trenches. They ignited barrels of black oil and threw them out of the city like golden rain. At this moment, a long howl came from the Jackalan army outside the city. The vulture demons hovering in the sky received Yenaga's order and rushed straight to the exposed artillery positions on the city wall like sharp arrows. Originally, there was a black-robed mage guarding each artillery position. If the vulture demons wanted to attack them, they were likely to be attacked head-on. However, under the crazy siege of the ghouls, the black-robed mages had to help the defenders and restrain the undead monsters. This gave the vulture demons a chance. They landed in the middle of the artillery positions and allowed the soldiers to shoot at them with flintlocks and crossbows. They reached out and pushed the heavy artillery set up on the artillery positions down the city wall. Soon, the artillery positions that had fallen into chaos stopped firing. The defenders who were fighting the ghoul army on the city wall could no longer hear the deafening sound of heavy artillery firing. Instead, it was replaced by the giant vulture demons' savage cries. This enhanced version of Virum's cry sounded like a small knife scraping against one's ears. It caused one's body to tense up and even caused one's heart to palpitate if one was too close. Fortunately, there were many spellcasters among the defenders who promptly used spells to boost the soldiers' morale. Otherwise, the city walls that both sides were still fighting for would fall into the hands of the ghoul army that was unaffected by external forces. It was no exaggeration to say that the defense line of Bite City was on the verge of collapse. Sitting on the throne in the golden tent, Mako straightened the dark blue crown that Pharaoh wore when he went out to battle. He had already asked his attendants to raise the golden ponytail banner, which symbolized that he was going to fight the enemy together with the soldiers to the death. On the brocade carpet in front of him, there were 7 or 8 nobles in luxurious clothing kneeling. They were none other than the Khedive who were responsible for overseeing the overseas enclaves of the Medici Empire. I'll cut to the chase. If you want to redeem yourself, you can do that. Bring your men and fight on the city wall. Replace the defenders who have been fighting for the whole night and rest for an hourglass. I know that all of you have brought your elite troops, and in a battle of equal numbers, you are not at a disadvantage even against the Imperial Guard Legion. Now is the best time to serve the Empire. Your Majesty, then. Serene Khedive banged his head on the ground, as if he was frightened by Mako's order. The Khedive had rushed to Bite City overnight, and the vanguard had only brought a little more than 10,000 people. At this time, there were more than 70 to 80,000 soldiers on the city wall, and there were more reserve troops under the city wall that could support them at any time. However, instead of asking the reserve troops to fight on the city wall, it was hard to say whether the Khedive could survive after an hourglass, let alone whether they could withstand the attack of the undead monsters. Just hold on for an hourglass. Mako did not give the Khedive a chance to argue. His hand was already clenching the hilt of his curved sword. Under the pressure of Pharaoh's imposing manner and the Imperial Guard Army's suppression, the Khedive had no choice but to obey and fight their way to the city wall. The way they fought on the city wall was also unique. Behind the city wall, there was a tower that was higher than the city wall every 200 yards. The Khedive soldiers climbed up the stairs first, and then they used the suspension bridge built by the spellcasters to directly plunge into the tide of ghouls from above. There were quite a number of heavy armored cavaliers riding on 6-legged horses, clearing the way. 3 to 4 armored cavaliers raised their spears and charged down from the suspension bridge, cutting the ghouls in half like a hot knife through butter. Following behind them were even more heavy-armored scythe swordsmen. They charged down in a spurt of energy, completely forming a dam that blocked the ghouls' path. Although this method did not work every time, there were enough towers behind the city wall. If one place did not work, they could change to another. As long as 2 nearby towers succeeded in building a dam, more soldiers could fill in and kill all the ghouls between the 2 dams, forming a plug in the surging tide of ghouls. Many a little makes a mickle, and the plug would gradually connect, and a section of the city wall would be cleared. The defenders of Bite City, who were in a stalemate with the ghouls, could take the opportunity to go down to the city wall and rest. However, although this method worked well, it consumed a lot of soldiers. If the reserve corps were to use this method, they might be able to kill all the ghouls in an hourglass and recapture all the fallen city walls. And for Khedive's 10,000 men to fill in, it was like trying to put out a burning cart with a cup of water. That bastard is torturing us. Zagan, who was wearing the fanatic armor that he bought from the territory of the Megalosaurus Pasha at a high price, led his personal guards to the city wall and fought. He was full of resentment. Of course, he knew why Mako gave such an order. He wanted to teach the Khedive a lesson that they would never forget and let them taste the bitter consequences of disobeying Pharaoh. However, Zagan actually wronged Mako. How could Pharaoh of the Medici Empire be so narrow-minded? It's time, sitting in the golden tent, Pharaoh Mako waved his hand and asked an attendant to rush out to give the order. He was used to hiding the secret until the last moment. My soldiers have been freezing for a night. It's time to warm up by the fire. Just as an hourglass was about to pass, and all the defenders of Bite City had retreated from the city wall, the bronze pipes that were originally laid on the city wall and were responsible for spraying black oil to the trenches outside the city suddenly broke, and large amounts of black oil poured directly onto the city wall. Someone threw torches, light balls, and other things onto the city wall. Raging flames rose. The Khedive, who were still leading people to resist the ghouls, immediately ordered their men to retreat through the bridge connecting the tower and the city wall. However, at this time, the bridge built with magic no longer existed. In front of them, there was only an endless horde of ghouls, a drop of nearly 100 feet from the ground, and raging flames in front and behind them. Mako misled me. Chapter 922. In Pharaoh's attendant's office, an attendant wrote the last line in the history book. The city wall was ablaze, and the Khedive, fought the enemy with fire. They did not retreat or surrender, and they were loyal and brave. Standing on the dome of a building in the city, Naaman looked at the towering city wall that surrounded Bite City like a fire dragon. He was filled with emotions. They still lack artistic knowledge. As a Leviathan contract demon, in his memory, many Batsid Devil commanders had used similar artistic means on the bloody battlefield. Compared with those guys, although Pharaoh and Mako's techniques were similar, they were still somewhat petty. Compared to the firewall, the Batsid Devil even dared to plant explosives under the city wall. As soon as the demons attacked the city wall, the explosives would go off immediately. At that time, not to mention a small number of allies on the city wall to lure the enemy, even the demons near the city wall would be killed by the violent explosion. After the explosion, the Batsid Devil commander would order the army to charge out and cut down all the demons who were blown up. In the bloody battle, the Batsu people had won many classic battles with fewer troops, and the final victory was obtained in this way. It was just a fire. How could it be as good as an explosion? Moreover, the allies who fell on the city wall because of the fire must have resentment before they died. Wasn't this adding fuel to the abyss demon energy that was spreading in the city? Serves you right for being unlucky, Naaman thought. Sure enough, the fact was almost the same as what Naaman thought. After the black oil on the city wall burned, Yinagu, who was gathering the Jackalan army outside the city, was stunned at first, but after waiting for a long time, he didn't hear any explosion. Soon, he figured out the reason. Not doing things thoroughly, the bad habit of mortals. Thinking of this, the Jackalan god couldn't help but laugh. When the fire dragon was extinguished, some bricks on the city wall had been blackened and roasted by the flames. The defenders in Bite City were also ready to climb the city wall to continue to resist the next wave of enemy attacks. At this moment, Yinagu took the first step. Without any movement, an arched door composed of rugged rocks rose from behind him and was erected at the top of the throne that had been built last night. Seeing the god summoning the gate of assembly, the Flinder Jackalans who were waiting around the throne howled loudly in response. They thought that their king was going to open the door and summon a new army from the Dark Prairie to attack Bite City. However, this was not the case. Obscure spatial fluctuations with the gate as the center, ripples spread out in all directions. But the spellcasters with some skills could feel that the space here had become like frosted glass. Frosted. When the light blue vortex above the assembly gate gradually subsided, no Flinders gnolls walked out from it. Instead, a foul torrent poured out from it. This is the sea water from the cursed throat. Some knowledgeable Jackalan spellcasters immediately realized that this foul, yellow soup-like torrent was not an ordinary thing. It was seawater from the Strait of Cursed Throat, east of the Dark Prairie, near the edge of the seeping forest. In the past, out of the nature of the Jackalans, the roaring slaves of the king hated this soup-like sea and refused to get close to its cold and harsh sea water. Therefore, many mortal slaves who escaped because of the carelessness of the Jackalans all ran to this place to find a way to survive. They usually joined the fleet of a legendary captain named Malagasy Uno. This fleet of mortal slaves gathered for survival would circle the coast back and forth to rescue fugitive slaves, even those mortal Jackalans who were unwilling to submit to Yinagu's abominable demands. However, although a sea beast caught by chance could feed the entire fleet for a month or more, their most common source of food was still human flesh. When food became scarce, the crew would isolate the weaker passengers and kill them, then use the corpses as dry food for everyone on the ship. Each member had to eat the flesh of their former companions to prove their loyalty and dedication to survival. But the real feast had yet to begin until some of the newcomers refused the gruesome meal. At this time, the nervous crowd would attack these cowards with ruthless and cruel wildness, killing them and cooking their corpses into main dishes. It was precisely because of this that Malagasy Uno had the title of King of Cannibals. He commanded the large ship of chaos, the Reaper, in the center of the fleet. Every few months, Unos would lead his fleet away from the shores of this stratum and head to the borderlands. They would then enter the interplanar abyss to patrol the seas, searching for more ships to join their growing fleet. Many Jackalans thought that Uno was the enemy of Yeenagu, the god of Jackalans. But it was not until today that they were surprised to find that the king of cannibals was just a loyal dog that Yeenagu had tamed in the cursed throat in order to tame the entire lair. At this time, he was leading people to drive the Reaper straight to the city wall of Bite City with the help of the turbid torrent. When the thick yellow seawater came into contact with the city wall, which was still emitting high temperature, suddenly shattered into pieces like tofu dregs. Under the leadership of the Reaper, the fleet of cursed throats sailed into Bite City without any hindrance, becoming the first wave of troops to capture this great city in the truest sense. It worked. Yeenagu's long and narrow face showed a ferocious smile. He had made the right move in opening the Gate of Assembly. Originally, it would have consumed a lot of his power to guide the seawater of the cursed throat through the Gate of Assembly. However, because of Pharaoh and Mako's terrible commanding art, the resentment of more than 10,000 people who were burned alive on the city wall of Bite City once again aroused the demonic energy that was spreading in the city and attracted the attention of the Abyss Will. Therefore, Yeenagu opened the Gate of Assembly again. In fact, he had the support of the Abyss itself. It did not take much effort at all. Bite City has been broken. The god of Jackalans stood up straight and roared wildly. The largest city in this layer has been captured by me. From now on, you can hunt here for 3 days. Shout out my holy name and enjoy your feast, my people. Hearing the instructions of the king of Jackalans, all the Flindian Jackalans under his command seemed to have been injected with a cardiac stimulant. They had already gained too much from the Ash World. This place was simply their blessed land. When they heard that they would be allowed to hunt for 3 days, they all couldn't wait to rush towards Bite City on all fours. Time was limited, so they had to cherish it. Chapter 923. The battle had reached a critical moment. Yeenagu used the seawater in the Strait of Cursed Throat to break the scorching outer defense of Bite City in one fell swoop. Then, he used the fleet of man-eater King Malagasy Unos to rush into the city. These two axes indeed caught Pharaoh and Mako off guard. However, Bite City was a majestic city after all, and Medika's army was not all useless. Moreover, there was a time limit to how long the assembly gate could be opened. When the treasure was temporarily closed due to the exhaustion of energy, the flood would no longer be as powerful as before. The first fleet that rushed into the city, after submerging dozens of markets with the help of the flood, was stranded by the artificial reefs formed by various pavilions in the city. Unos had no choice but to lead his subordinates and charge off the warship, turning from pirates to bandits on land. However, when they wanted to rob and kill the rich families in the city, they were met with desperate resistance. For example, the cannibal king took the lead. With the help of the tall mast of the Reaper, he had just used a rope to fly into a large house with a wall more than 10 yards tall. Then, he was immediately hit by all sorts of cursed spells cast on him by a few mages. His agility, strength, and even physique were temporarily weakened. Faced with more than 100 warriors who swarmed at him with swords and axes, it was fortunate that he was not chopped into meat paste. Resist these demons and guard the house of the Bella family. The warriors roared. It turned out that the man-eater king had flown into the house of Bella Bay by coincidence. Fortunately, Uno's armor was strong enough to prevent him from being chopped to death by those warriors. However, the other pirates who flew with him were not so lucky. They all fell to the ground and became boxes. The pirates who did not use a cable to fly used a shield to protect their heads and crouched at the foot of the wall. A storm of projectile weapons came at them. Arrows, asphalt cans, stones, and flintlock bullets slammed into their shields. From time to time, the sound of shields cracking could be heard. The pirates desperately used axes, sharp swords, wooden sticks, iron rods, and pickaxes to chisel away at the bluestone courtyard door until a large hole large enough for a person to pass through had been carved out. From the hole, they could see a large group of enemies surrounding the legendary captain, Unos. This caused them to hesitate for a moment. There is no need to doubt the loyalty of the cannibal fleet. After rounding it up, it was basically nothing. Seeing his subordinates' hesitation, Unos naturally understood what they were thinking. It was nothing more than a dead captain is a good captain. Captains take turns to be my captain tomorrow. One more Unos doesn't make a difference. A bunch of bastards. Uno sure cursed in his mind. Taking advantage of the time he gained from killing the two enemies in front of him, he quickly reached his hand into the human skin pocket at his waist and put his finger into a bear trap with sharp teeth for it to suck his blood. This was a magical item. With it, the Unos soldiers could control the Reaper from afar. The ship of chaos, which looked tattered and whose sides were covered with demon skin, immediately responded, and the huge cannon at the bow of the ship turned around. Bang! The huge cannon fired, and energy shells made of pure chaotic energy hit the back of the group of cowering pirates. A few unlucky ones were affected by the sputtering, chaotic energy. Some of them were blown into minced meat, some were corroded into pools of blood, and some were turned into eels. They all had different endings. Go and save the captain. Sir Unos, hold on. Don't hurt my lord. After receiving the warning, the quick-witted pirates immediately shouted slogans and rushed forward. They engaged in a fierce battle with the warriors of the Bella family in the courtyard of Bay's mansion. The pressure on Unos, who was surrounded by the warriors of the family, was greatly reduced, and he quickly rushed out of the encirclement. This legendary captain no longer cared about his subordinates, who each had their own ulterior motives. Instead, he hurriedly asked the dark sorcerers on the ship to help him remove the curse. The situation that Unos encountered was not an exception. The other captains of the cannibal fleet, the Flinder Knoll army that rushed into Bite City, the undead army driven by the Abyss Ghouls, and the various Tana-wreathed demons that evolved from the original demons born from the demonic energy of the bottomless abyss, all fell into the sea of mass war. After all, this is the capital of the Medici Empire in the Ashen world. It has been a business partner of the scale of perpetual order for so long, and there are countless rich families here. All kinds of things that happened in the city were all seen by Na Min, who was standing on the round dome of a bell tower in the Grand Bazaar. Pharaoh Ma Ko is too disappointing. A good hand of cards has been played like this. In his opinion, in the face of Yenaga's invasion, Pharaoh Ma Ko, who had been praised by his ministers and nobles since he was young, had made several big mistakes in a row. First, he was too arrogant. He clearly knew that the enemy was the army of the bottomless abyss, but he did not launch a full-scale resistance at the first moment. Instead, he only placed his hopes on the strength of the defenders. Second, since he had confidence in his own strength, and this was indeed the case. Excluding the fact that there was a god's avatar in charge, the number and weapon level of the defenders of Bite City were, to be honest, far superior to those of the Knoll army. When defending the city, he should have set up a battle formation outside the city and relied on the firepower support on the city wall to take the initiative to fight the enemy in a decisive battle, not giving the enemy time to implement all kinds of conspiracies and tricks. Third, as mentioned before, if he wanted to play the art of command commonly used by the Batsid Devil, he should not be stingy. He should just break the city wall and build it again. It was not like the Medici Empire did not have the strength to do so. If he could eliminate a large number of the enemy's military strength in one fell swoop, intimidate the enemy's mentality, and then destroy the enemy's main force in one go, he would have secured victory now. If he had to drag it out and compete with the Abyss demons, he would just be courting death. The key now is the gate in front of the Ox and Lion Palace. Looking at the Golden Palace in the distance, which symbolized the authority of the pharaoh, Naaman immediately made a judgment in his heart. The so-called Ox and Lion Palace was actually the entrance to the inner city with bronze bulls and stone lions, which is the last place in Bite City that could be defended. Moreover, Naaman also knew that 50 years ago, the former pharaoh, Ascinder, had shown great power there. With the help of keys and the Great Vexual, he had forcibly defeated the avatar of the King of Worms, who was also a demon lord. From many big families that had existed for many years, even if the situation was unfavorable, they didn't flee in panic. Instead, they persisted in wrestling with the demons of the bottomless abyss. This was because they all remembered the great battle in front of the Ox and Lion Palace 50 years ago. If Marco couldn't defend this place, the confidence of the various forces in Bite City would disappear. That gate is the key. Naaman's eyes were shining. Although he received the order to weaken the strength of the defenders in Bite City and escalate the war quickly, Keyes also told him not to interfere in the war at this point. While he was thinking about something, a strange sound suddenly came from behind him. He did not know when, but a giant vulture demon had fixed its eyes on this bystander, who was looking into the distance. It was hiding behind him, and now it stretched out its sharp claws to launch a fatal sneak attack. With a thought, the contract barrier of the contract demon was about to be activated, and a dozen scrolls were about to fly out of his robe in an instant. However, someone was faster than him. Ja! With a light shout, the giant vulture demon's body suddenly stopped, and then a saber flashed like a waterfall. This enhanced version of the giant vulture demon was directly divided into two equal parts from its skull by a scimitar. The two parts quickly fell to the ground and were smashed into meat paste. A desert elf in a traditional beige robe stood behind Naaman, and his scimitar had been sheathed. He folded his arms and nodded to Naaman, as if what he had just done was just a trivial matter. Chapter 924. Lord Brock. Naaman cupped his hands and saluted. Although there was no response, the contract demon was not angry, because he had seen that the golden hoop that used to hang on the neck of this legendary sorcerer of sound of desert elves had been taken off. It was actually a magic item that limited the power of his voice. Therefore, it was normal that Brock did not respond, as he might kill someone when he opened his mouth. However, since Brock had appeared, the contract demon suddenly thought of a question. Had the other masters of the scale of perpetual order also come to Bite City? However, he had neither the means nor the intention to verify it. Since they had come tonight? No, today they would definitely show up. As a nobody, he could just stand aside and watch. In the hero square of the Ox and Lion Palace. From the first military gate, South Gate, of Bite City to the hero square, it was about 2 parsangs, less than 20 miles, in a straight line. The flood that suddenly poured into the city, carrying the dirty mud from the lower world, almost hit the square. It was only because of the terrain that the flood stopped a few blocks away. Dawn was approaching. The eternal blaze had leaped out from the horizon in the distance of the Golden Horn Bay. The light shone on the Golden Palace, converging on the crystal dome of the audience hall, which was the most outstanding building in the palace complex. Then, with the help of a magic item in the former laboratory of the Grand Dimensional, it condensed into a mass of solid energy, cleansing the body of its current master, Pharaoh Mako, who was already feeling tired. The fierce battle at night was the most exhausting. Even though Pharaoh was noble and did not need to take the brunt of the arrows and stones, it was still extremely exhausting to devise strategies in the golden tent in the front line. Besides, after the sudden change in the second half of the night, Mako had to retreat to the Ox and Lion Palace under the escort of his personal guards. At the same time, he had to write words of encouragement to the major families in the city, encouraging them to fight to the end in order to win the battle. At the same time, he also had to spend time rearranging his troops and taking over the retreating troops. No one cares whether you're tired or not. No matter if it's a noble or a subject, the only thing people care about is whether you can bring enough benefits to them. Thinking about what his father had taught him when he was young, Mako had a new understanding of it. Only victory can bring more benefits. With the help of his attendants, he had already changed into a fanatic armor decorated with gold paint. This treasure was a legendary armor that was offered by the scale of perpetual order, controlled by the Megalosaurus Pasha, to offset the taxes required to operate in Medic for 2 years. Unlike the ordinary fanatic armor that only needed to be fed with nutrient solution every day, this golden armor needed to consume 10 obsidian magic beads every day. In other words, it was the lives of 10 criminals and 10 complete souls that were converted into pure magic energy, constantly supplying energy to those picky, high-level flesh and blood. Naturally, This legendary armor also had great power. After wearing it, although the duration of continuous combat was limited, even if it was just an ordinary person, they could immediately have all kinds of physical data comparable to a legendary or even demigod warrior. Not only that, as long as the armor was full of energy, it could automatically cast 12 serious wounds healing and 3 resurrection spells for the wearer. The Berserker armor was equivalent to having 3 legendary-level priests supporting him. It was important to know that in the Ashen world, a place hated by the gods, the inheritance of the profession of priests had been cut off for thousands of years. Even if a legendary black-robed mage wanted to use obsidian magic beads to simulate the healing spells of priests, it would not be as outstanding as the effect of the legendary armor's automatic casting. It's worth the money, thought Pharaoh Mako as he put on the legendary armor and wrapped his head in a full-body helmet. However, he immediately pulled out the adamantine scythe sword that was stuck in the gap between the stone slabs in front of him with one hand, carried it on his shoulder, and strode towards the demonic army that was gathering in the hero square. The Flinders Gnolls, the Cannibal King and his pirates, the Abyss Ghouls and the ordinary ghouls that served them, and the middle high-level Tower Lee that had evolved from the original demons gathered from all over the city. They were all desperately attacking a layer of bubble film that covered the edge of the hero square, but this layer of defense was a lock that was jointly powered by dozens of senior-rank black-robed mages, and they could not break it in a short time. Seeing Pharaoh and Mako walking out of the golden tent neatly, the black-robed mages who had received orders from their attendants all stopped chanting at the same time. Bang! After the sound of a soap bubble bursting, the defensive bubble film instantly shattered, and the energy released in an instant vaporized many of the demons that had gathered around it. Victory! The people on Medici's side roared excitedly, and even Pharaoh, whose face was covered by the helmet, showed a smile on his face. Yellow sand covers the sun. Sand scorpion swallows the sky. Mako's voice came out through the sound amplification magic circle in the legendary armor. As he spoke, a scarlet halo quickly lingered on the legendary armor. When the halo solidified, a huge sand scorpion pattern appeared on the shining golden belly armor. Mako kicked hard on the square, paved with stone slabs, and his whole body jumped forward close to the ground. He held the adamantine sickle sword high in his hand, and the blade stirred up the wind and made a clanging sound. The vast desert outside Bite City also responded, and dozens of tornadoes rolled up a huge amount of yellow sand. Just one person's charge had the momentum of thousands of soldiers and horses. And as Mako slashed down hard, the yellow sand floating high in the sky fell from the sky like a flood bursting through a dam. The hundreds of Flinders Gnolls who bore the brunt were buried by the yellow sand in an instant, and no one knew whether they were dead or alive. And this was just the beginning. When Pharaoh and Mako slashed those monsters, every strike was aided by the yellow sand. The Flinders Gnolls and the pirates under the Cannibal King, who were cut by the adamantine sickle sword, were naturally decapitated. Those ghouls whose bodies were cut in half were wrapped in yellow sand, and the water in their bodies was stripped off in a few breaths, and they were completely annihilated into dry corpses. As for those Tana-Reet demons that had evolved in Bite City, they might be able to escape with their lives under the attack with all kinds of tricks, but Mako would catch up with them later. If one strike was not enough, he would strike twice, and if 2 strikes were not enough, he would strike thrice. If he encountered a Tana-Reet that ran too fast like the Flaming Lion demon, he would simply use law intimidation from a distance, and then catch up with them and send them back to the bottomless abyss. Anyway, with the inheritance of the great dimensional and the support of a large number of obsidian magic beads, casting some warlock spells did not cost him any energy at all. It was just a casual strike. What were you doing earlier? Numan, who was still standing on the dome of the bell tower, was speechless as he watched Mako killing in front of the gate of the Ox Lion Palace. If this pharaoh was really as decisive as his father, thinking back to those years, Essador did not have the help of the legendary armor, nor did he plunder the inheritance of the great dimensional. He only held an adamantine sickle sword and dared to fight against the incarnation of a demon lord. That was true courage. Perhaps the situation would not be as bad as it was now. Chapter 925. Mako was fighting. Relying on the recovery ability and extraordinary endurance bestowed upon him by the legendary armor, the powerful spell-casting ability of the warlock that he had plundered from the legacy left behind by the Great Dimensional, as well as the various innate abilities brought about by the bloodline of the Hero King that flowed in his body, the Pharaoh alone defeated his opponent in front of the Bull Lion Palace. Every punch he made, every kick he made, every swing of his sickle blade, all of them were able to bring up the sand in the air to act as a supporting force. The Desert of the Ash World is a sentient living thing. It can talk to itself and think about thoughts that only this vast desert can contain. When it had to find a way to communicate with those limited existences, it released a piece of its fragment and filled it with a mortal body that was most suitable for exercising its will. Although many people in the Medici Empire, including the nobles in the imperial court, once believed that the legend of the empire's hero king was made up to strengthen the pharaoh's authority was a myth. But today, after witnessing with their own eyes the terrifying divine ability of someone with the bloodline of a king, they were completely convinced. Because of the blessing of the desert spirit, the successive generations of pharaoh of the Medici Empire could burst out the combat power comparable to a demigod in a short period of time. Bey, who was held by the claw of the Knoll god Yenagu, did not have time to escape and was captured when the city was broken. Under the influence of the soul-stealing spell, he spilled out all the secrets he knew about Pharaoh one by one. Pharaoh is the guard, warrior, and envoy of this desert. No one could defeat Pharaoh when he explodes. Hearing this, Yenagu sneered disdainfully. Yes, there is no human, but I am the god of the knolls, the lord of a floor in the abyss. After saying that, he clenched his claws and casually crushed Bey to death. The next moment, Yenagu disappeared from his throne and appeared at the bow of the Reaper, the ship of chaos stranded in Bite City. He stretched out two steel-like arms and hugged the giant chaos cannon installed on the deck. Ride, creak, bang. The Knoll god forcibly removed the giant cannon from the ship of chaos, and then he jumped up high with the killing weapon in his arms. Yenagu turned the cannon to the hero square in front of the Ox and Lion Palace. With the favor of the Abyss as cannon powder, Yenagu personally filled the giant cannon. Not only that, the Abyss demonic energy that was still left in Bite City seemed to be attracted at this time, and it quickly gathered towards the giant cannon like swallows returning to their nest. Break! A super-large energy bomb completely composed of chaotic evil thoughts was ejected from the muzzle of the Chaos Cannon and fell on the Hero Square with unstoppable force. Due to the energy overload, even the Chaos Cannon, which was used as a launcher, was shattered into thousands of pieces at the same time. The Pharaoh King Mako was still slaughtering in all directions, but suddenly his heart palpitated for no reason. This was a sign that he had been targeted by the chaotic evil. When he looked up, he found a super-large energy bomb with a turbid color like a dung ball falling from the sky. Magic power! Sandstorm! He quickly raised his fine gold sickle sword from bottom to top, and a gust of wind wrapped the yellow sand, forming a barrier that looked soft but was actually as thick as a wall with him as the center. Billions of sand and dust drowned Mako's figure, and he couldn't be seen from the outside. Bang! The energy bomb hit the sand barrier and shattered with a bang. Even though the attack did not seem to have any earth-shattering effect, the chaotic and evil thoughts that were sputtering out recklessly even affected the Imperial Guards and black-robed mages who were far away from the point of impact. Their hearts were filled with negative emotions such as despair, fear, jealousy, and so on. Not to mention Pharaoh, who was directly facing this horrible energy bomb. Even with the sandstorm as a barrier, the pervasive chaotic evil thoughts still affected Mako, who was constantly dodging and escaping within the range of the sandstorm. Moreover, as the main target of the attack, he was not only affected by the emotional impact, but also by the actual magic damage. Corrosive, freezing, burning, dark corrosion, poison, cursing, mind blast, spiritual body strike, malicious transfiguration. There were so many spells that it was impossible to list them all. All of them were used on Marco, and it was only the influence of the chaotic thoughts. The evil thoughts made these spells more vicious, and the effect was even more terrible than when the spellcaster used them. In a few breaths, the sandstorm as a barrier disappeared, and Pharaoh and Mako revealed their sorry figures. The legendary armor that was originally shining with golden light had now become tattered. There were many potholes, and some places were smoking. What was even more terrifying was the fact that only Mako knew. His legendary armor had already performed resurrection on him twice. 3 resurrection spells was the limit of this armor. In other words, he had now changed from 4 lives to 2 lives, and the powerful enemy who had just attacked him had now arrived in front of him. "Why don't you die?" Yinagu said with a grim smile. Although he spoke in the Knoll language, because this god secretly used his divine power, everyone in the hero square could understand his meaning. Naturally, the people on the Medici Empire side were all excited when they heard this. "Let me send you off." Yinagu put away his smile, and his momentum suddenly rose. A 3-headed flail appeared in his hand, and a fine gold chain armor appeared on his body. Before he finished speaking, the Knoll god appeared in front of Mako like a cannonball. He did not care about martial ethics at all. The 3-headed flail swung over, and Mako could only raise the fine gold sickle sword in his hand to block it. However, this kind of weapon was not so easy to block. After the 3 flail collided with the sword blade, it instantly turned around and continued to smash Mako's head. Thump, thump, thump. 3 consecutive sounds, all hit. Even with the full cover helmet blocking, Mako's head was still dizzy, and his nose was shaken to the point that blood spurted out. In addition, what was even more terrifying was that Yinagu's flail was a divine artifact, and all 3 hits would automatically cause instant damage. After Mako's legendary armor used the last resurrection, it directly declared that its energy was exhausted. Wearing it on his body was not only useless, but also a heavy burden. At this moment, Yinagu also followed up and continued to launch a second wave of fierce attacks. He waved the 3-headed chain, which was as dense as a cow's hair. In the end, it caused Marco to make another mistake and leave the middle door wide open. Bang! The Knoll god jumped up and kicked Mako directly in the chest. Pharaoh was like a baseball that had been hit, flying back high and smashing into the gate of the Ox and Lion Palace at the end of the Hero Square. Chapter 926. Battle. No, it should be said that it was a war. At this point, Bite City could basically be declared to have changed hands. Although Marco nominally still had a lot of military power at his disposal, distant water could not put out a nearby fire. Moreover, he was defeated at the gate of the Ox and Lion Palace, which made many people lose confidence in this pharaoh. Pharaoh was also known as the King of Heroes. If one wanted to become a king, one must first be a hero who could defeat the enemy. Mako's failure meant that he had violated the contract of guarding the survival of humans in this desert. In other words, he was no longer qualified to fulfill the contract. Retreat to the Golden Palace and open the magic lock. Yinagu did not succeed in chasing Mako because after being sent flying, the pharaoh was immediately rescued by some powerful warriors and black-robed mages. The bubble membrane that had blocked the demon army for a while appeared again. The entire Golden Palace was protected by such a layer of membrane in the middle. Under the sunlight, it was colorful, and swords could not do anything to it. However, this was just a flash in the pan. Seeing Yinagu defeat the enemy, the Jackalan army was almost boiling. These monsters howled and rushed to the Golden Palace. In addition, there were already a large number of ghouls in the city, and they were constantly replenished by the dead in the city. After a certain amount of sacrifice, the magic lock that enveloped the Golden Palace was quickly broken. Even though a large number of demons were taken away at the moment the magic lock was broken, they still did not stop. The gate of the Ox and Lion Palace was soon controlled by the demons. As the gate of the Golden Palace, This gate itself was priceless and immeasurable. Its surface was inlaid with crushed gold jewelry, and all kinds of precious materials were shining. This precious magical item that had been created with extraordinary power shocked the visitors from the abyss. What a rich material plain country. We are blessed. Unoshur, the king of cannibals, who followed Yenaga's army, stroked the gate of the Golden Palace. His eyes were shining with the evil fire of jealousy and greed. Soon, he led his men to cut the gate into pieces. They took knives peeled off the patterns outlined by pure silver thick lines and secretly put them into their pockets. Demons viewed silver as a poisonous pincer, but these pirates loved it very much. When they entered the Ox and Lion Palace, they were even more dazzled by the luxurious decorations inside. Every silver chandelier was hung by a chain that was as thick as a man's arm. The pillars were inlaid with jade, porphyry, and other precious gems. There were countless silver fences, gold censers, and sacrificial vessels. Even the ordinary wooden door was made of walnut, which was not even a product of the Ashes world. It's shameful to waste. Unos took the lead and shouted. However, he took the lead and chopped all the treasures he saw into small pieces that could be easily transported. The pirates of the Cursed Throat fleet used axes, crowbars, and swords to hack, pry, and dig. They searched every corner of the palace, not letting go of any valuable items. In addition, these people also tortured the servants captured from the palace, forcing them to tell them where the valuables were stored. Some people were wantonly killed in order to protect the holy statues or relics of the pharaoh family of Medici. Women were forcibly raped and men were slaughtered. They drove mules, donkeys, sand rhinoceroses, and other beasts of burden that they could find in Bite City into the gate of the Bull Lion Palace to carry the trophies. However, these beasts could not stand steadily on the colorful ancient marble floor and slipped down one after another. Encountering this kind of difficulty, the raiders raised their swords against the livestock and began slaughtering them without regard for anything else. Dirty blood flowed all over the ground. The intestines of the animals were pierced, and feces and urine flowed out. The floor was even more slippery and difficult to walk on. Every once in a while, a pirate would accidentally fall into feces and blood. Many Flinders gnolls who passed by these places laughed, but the ghouls who did not abstain from meat and vegetables might stop for a moment, scooping up a handful of blood to moisten their throats, and tearing and eating some raw meat to fill their stomachs that could never be satisfied. Yenagu naturally knew about the Onoshi's behavior of bringing people to take advantage of the situation. But the Gnoll god did not care. So what if that guy packed up some spoils of war? With the gate of assembly in hand, could they still run back to the abyss with the treasures? In fact, Uno's behavior of packing up the treasures was exactly what Yenagu wanted. Let these people gather all the treasures first, and when the gate of assembly was opened again, he would not have to send people to collect them in a hurry. Anyway, because of the removal of the Chaos Cannon, the ship of Chaos named Reaper had basically been declared destroyed. Uno's, this chess piece, was reduced to a defective product in Yenaga's eyes. The Gnoll god was no longer prepared to let the Cursed Throat fleet return to the abyss. After all, daring to call himself king of cannibals, Uno's had actually violated Yenaga's taboo. Of course, this was all in the future. At this time, Yenaga's thoughts were actually more on how to eliminate Pharaoh Mako. After the Golden Palace was breached, Pharaoh did not stay here. Instead, he fled all the way to the north with the remaining forces of the Imperial Guards and garrison troops. They went directly from the north gate of the Golden Palace to the military dock in the Golden Horn Bay. They boarded the warships that were docked, maintained, and practiced here all year round. Although there was no proverb in the abyss, if you don't kill the snake, it will hurt you, Yenagu had learned a similar principle from the cruel wars with other demon lords all year round. In a local war, if you could not annihilate the opponent's main force or leader at once, then this local war was likely to turn into a tug of war. This would not only affect the subsequent benefits drawn from the war, but it was also possible to encounter the opponent's counterattack at a special moment. In the war with the towering King Buffett, although he had fallen, and the succubus queen Mechanut, Yenagu had suffered a lot in this regard before. Now, by chance and coincidence, he had finally entered the Ashen world, a rich material plane that even moved him. How could he make the same mistake again? He had made up his mind that today, no matter what, he would kill Pharaoh Mako. In war, the death of a leader often led to disaster and rout. As long as Mako was killed, the Medici Empire would temporarily fall into a predicament of being leaderless. At that time, whether it was taking the opportunity to defeat them one by one, completely occupying this country, transforming it into the joy of the Jackaland's wanton reproduction and hunting, or returning to the bottomless abyss after getting some benefits, Yenagu would have more flexible choices. Chapter 927. That's the only way, Yenagu thought. The assembly gate had been used once at dawn and could not be used again today. As the god of the Knolls, he did not like to fight on the sea. Therefore, when he saw Pharaoh and Mako leading the fleet out to sea, he could only use his other trump card. Tell Unos to bring people on board, Yenagu ordered. The few Flinder Knoll spellcasters who followed him immediately used magic communication to inform the commander of the Cursed Throat fleet. Not long after, the Cannibal King, who was still leading his subordinates to demolish, immediately carried large and small bags of wealth and ran to their respective warships. However, because Yenagu had dismantled the Reaper before, Unos could only temporarily change the flagship. He led his men to the military port at the end of the Golden Palace, grabbed 3 Garthai-type galleys, and used them as his own ship. Then, he chased after Pharaoh's fleet. Isn't this courting death? There were only about 700 people on these 3 Garthai-type galleys, all of whom were sailors on the original ship of Chaos, the Reaper. Most of the remaining people of the Cursed Throat fleet were still in Bite City. Most of their warships had been stranded as the flood receded. Even if Pharaoh and Mako fled in panic, there were at least 20,000 soldiers around them. Bite City had a harbor, and the soldiers of the Imperial Guards and garrison troops had also received ship drills in the past. After boarding the ship, they were qualified navy. Although the Garthai-type galleys were also the main warships of the Medici Empire, with only a few hundred sailors and 3 warships, even if they caught up with Pharaoh's fleet, it would be like using a chicken to hit a rock. What do you know? Faced with his subordinates who were constantly trying to persuade him to stay alive, Unos simply scolded them back. Raise the sails for me. If you have the time to talk nonsense, why don't you all go paddle instead? What are you worried about? I'm also on the ship. Some of the older pirates heard this and immediately felt reassured. That's right. Others might not know, but they had followed Unos on the seas of the bottomless abyss for decades. They knew the integrity of this legendary captain very well. Knowing that their opponent was stronger than them, they still dared to board the ship and fight. This was definitely not the style of the Unos, but he actually did it. There was no need to ask. There was definitely something fishy going on here. With that thought in mind, the pirates hurriedly got to work. Those who untied the mooring ropes, those who adjusted the sail boom, and those who were not skilled but had the strength to help the ship's slaves row the oars. They were too preoccupied with plundering the bullion palace that they forgot to capture some slaves to act as oarsmen, so the pirates could only do it themselves. All in all, they believed that the Unos would not throw their lives away. The 3 Galazian warships did not need to be in any formation. They simply rushed out of the military port side by side and headed straight for Pharaoh's fleet of over 100 warships. Of course, the Unos were not stupid enough to engage the enemy's main force with only 3 warships. Instead, they waited for the opportunity to find some leftovers and specifically targeted some smaller warships that were not as good as the Galazian warships. They rushed up and bombarded them with cannon fire. Golden Horn Bay was a rather large bay, but no matter how big it was still just a bay. Pharaoh and Mako's fugitive fleet had sailed for about 1/3 of an hourglass and was about to reach the exit of the bay. After getting out of there, the fleet would be able to sail into the outer seas of the Medici Empire. At that time, whether it was going to various overseas enclaves or other cities near the empire's coastline, he would have a right to choose between advancing and retreating. In the stern of the flagship of the Golden Horn ship, Mako's face was gloomy as he roared angrily in his heart. Damn abyssal demons. I'll be back. Just you wait. He had now decided that the fleet would temporarily rest in the Archipelago province, not far from Bite City. Anyway, Zagan was dead, and the Archipelago province lacked someone to govern it. As pharaoh, he could take over it for the time being. When he gave the military order, he would enlist all the Pasha of Medosai and the troops of various provinces to encircle and suppress the demon army. He wanted to capture demon Lord Yinagu, who had sent him flying not long ago, alive, and cut him into pieces every day, but he would not let him escape back to the bottomless abyss and let him suffer terrible torture for the sins he had committed for all eternity. Come. Thinking of how to deal with Yinagu, Mako's mood was a little better. He calmed down and asked the attendant to enter the cabin to write a decree for him. Send someone to invite the Megalosaurus Pasha. Let him come with the army in person. And tell him that I've decided to exempt the business tax of the scale of perpetual order for 20 years, as long as he can take down the demon lord's avatar. It's best to send him to me alive. The attendant knelt on the ground, took out a pen and paper from a small wooden cylinder at his waist, and wrote the decree. Then he presented it to Mako for personal review and stamped it with Pharaoh's seal. Finally, the attendant hurriedly picked up the decree that was already effective and hurried out of the cabin to find the accompanying black-robed mage. With the help of magic, this decree could appear on the desk of the Megalosaurus Pasha's official residence in a flash. His Majesty finally put down his pride this time. Holding the decree, the attendant's heart was also relieved. But not long after he ran out, the flagship of the golden ship suddenly shook violently, and it seemed that it was going to capsize. Fortunately, there were black-robed mages on the ship hurriedly cast spells, which stabilized the giant ship. However, they had not yet sailed out of the Golden Horn Bay into the open sea, so where did such a big storm come from? There was no doubt that the sudden storm was caused by Yinagu. This ability was also one of the trump cards of the Null God. Before Yinagu became the Demon Lord of the 422nd floor of the Abyss, the previous Demon Lord was a powerful fallen angel named Azar. Long before Azar dominated this floor was the domain of the Storm Lord, the Demon of Obylis, Batshard. Although Batshard was forced to cut off his connection with this floor due to the betrayal of the demon Tanari, and his vitality was squeezed out of his huge shell, the Lord of Obylis seemed to still have his last breath. His death process had lasted for tens of thousands of years. Now, this huge and strange demon was similar to a twisted beached whale. He could not move on his own and could only be exposed to the scorching sun of this floor. Again and again, the coastal rock formations that supported his half-dead body were smashed by violent hurricanes or treacherous acid rain. These anomalies were unintentionally caused by Batshard, who once had control of the storm and was slowly dying. Although he could no longer speak, Batshard still retained a fragment of his once vast consciousness. If he communicated through telepathy, he would talk in a slow and melancholy tone about an era long before the birth of Tanari, about the rise and fall of the oldest demons. Yinagu was curious about these legends. Even if he did not fully understand their importance, he often visited the dry seabed where Batshard was dying. In the last few hundred years, the Null Monarch had even changed the route of his mobile fortress, which was used to patrol the plain. Once a year, the long journey had to pass by the dry seabed so that he could talk to the dying demon of Obylis. And it was in this frequent conversation that Yinagu, who was originally a member of the Giant God system, the Null God and the Tyrant God were both defeated by the Giant God system and then merged into the Giant God system. Naturally, they were envious of the powerful clergy of the Giant God system, such as the Sun, Weather, and Storm, would not give up this opportunity and finally found out some secrets about the storm power that Batshard had. However, in the bottomless abyss, Yinagu rarely exposed this secret of his. It was just that at this time, he was in a remote, but actually quite rich material plane, and most of the enemies that he was afraid of had no informants here. In addition, he felt that occupying the Ashes plane would bring great benefits to himself, so he chose to use this trump card to intercept Pharaoh's fleeing fleet. A violent storm suddenly formed, and the seawater outside the Golden Horn Bay was driven by the storm, forming a solid sea wall in front of Pharaoh's fleet, so that they could not rush out of the bay. Thunderclaps and bolts of lightning rained down from the sky, as if they wanted to charge every corner of the air in this place. This was also one of the uses of the climate power. Its biggest role was not to kill the enemy, but to affect those spellcasters to use teleportation spells and temporarily trap them in this area. Originally, after the gate of the Ox and Lion Palace was breached, Marco chose to escape by ship instead of teleporting away directly because he did not want to give up the Imperial Guards and garrison troops that he had gathered. Otherwise, he could have evacuated quickly, but he would not have been left as a commander without an army. There were only a few big cats and small cats left, because he considered that he had to mobilize Medic, Pasha, and Khedive, so he had to take the army to escape by ship at that time. However, how could a cunning demon lord like Yinagu not see the plan of the king of the material plane? Since he had made up his mind to bury Pharaoh of the Medici Empire in this sea area today, how could he give him a chance to use teleportation spells? So he imposed a restriction on the Golden Horn Bay as soon as he made a move. Not only that, the terrible storm not only formed in the Golden Horn Bay, but also in the devastated Bight City. Several towering tornadoes suddenly formed. The warships of the Cursed Throat fleet stranded in the city were suddenly carried into the sky by the tornadoes, and then fell into the Golden Horn Bay. Although there were definitely casualties in this, it did complete the magnificent feat of moving a huge fleet into the water. Chapter 928. Golden Horn Bay was in a state of chaos. Pharaoh and Ma Ko's fleeing fleet braved the wind and waves as they struggled to get into formation. There was nothing they could do about it. Most of the fleeing fleet was made up of galleys, and all of the offensive capabilities of these ships were concentrated at the bow. The 3 or 5 bow cannons that pointed forward had very little rotation to the left and right, and the firing range was very narrow. Moreover, the bow was the only place on the ship where a large number of soldiers could gather. Conventional galleys used cannons, flintlocks, and arrows to sweep the deck of the enemy ship, and then used a small bridge with a charging angle to ram the enemy ship, allowing the soldiers to board the enemy ship's deck through the small bridge. The hull of the galleys was just a fragile shell that could be easily destroyed by impact or cannonballs. If the side or stern of the galleys were attacked by another galleys, they could only sit and wait for death. Uno's Cursed Throat fleet formed a crescent moon formation. Their goal was to outflank and surround the enemy with fewer numbers, and then disrupt the enemy's formation through close combat. Although this fleet from the abyss was not easy to obtain due to the lack of shipbuilding resources, and other than the main warships, the other ships were not large, they were more mobile, and in a chaotic battle, it was easier to attack the enemy from the side and destroy them. For both sides, maintaining the integrity of the front of the formation was of the utmost importance. But Pharaoh's galleys were more cumbersome. So for him, the principle of mutual support was a matter of life and death. In this situation, this word had to be expressed literally. The 2 neighboring galleys had to maintain a distance of 100 paces from each other, because this distance was far enough that the oars of the 2 ships would not collide, but it was close enough to prevent the enemy from forcing their way in. At the same time, for the same reason, the galleys had to maintain their formation and could not leave it. If they charged too far forward, they would be easily separated, surrounded, and destroyed by the enemy. If they fell too far behind, it would be easy for the enemy to intervene and cause chaos. Once there was a gap in the formation, the battle would become a dangerous game in which fate was left to. But to maintain this principle on a front that was several kilometers wide required great skill. If one looked down from the sky, the effect of the formation was very clear. The formation of the fleeing fleet, which was twisting and turning to fight, was constantly expanding and contracting like an accordion. When the ships adjusted their positions based on the golden ship in the middle, the front of the entire formation would form a zigzag curve, fluctuating back and forth. On Pharaoh's side, all the soldiers were making their final preparations. The weaponsmiths shuttled back and forth among the oarsmen, distributing swords and knives. The aisles were heaped with arms, ale, dried meat, and bread. Officers of all ranks were rallying the troops. Flintlocks were examining their barrels and powder. The veterans who were equipped with excellent armor used chicken skin to wipe the blades of their sickle swords. They put on their helmets and prepared for the boarding battle that was about to begin. The commanders, including Ma Ko, put on their breastplates and helmets. They lifted the visor of their helmets to feel the sea breeze, but they also smelled the stench of the ship. The surgeons spread out their instruments and tested the saw with their fingers to see if it was sharp enough. Thousands of oarsmen worked hard under the urging of the cracking whips and the thumping of the drums. With their backs to the enemy, they paddled. The ship moved steadily towards the enemy. A few miles away, the Cursed Throat fleet was also preparing. The composition of the Uno's fleet was very complicated, including pirates formed by some mortals who escaped from the Dark Steppe, Flindian gnolls who wanted to escape the oppression of their tribal leaders and go to the sea to make a living, and even some Tana-reaped demon sailors who were collected from the abyss. There was obviously some friction between the various factions. Although their leaders believed in opportunism, they still had some different opinions on how to fight. For example, a gnoll warlock wanted his sailors, most of whom were Flindian gnolls, to go forward and lure the enemy, then turn around and lead the enemy to charge towards the coast of Bite City. Their ships had a shallow draft, and most of the crew were only familiar with the various skills of coastal warfare. On the dock, he had already sent people to set up the cannons and ballistae collected from the city. If Pharaoh's warships followed, they would be able to annihilate them in a pincer attack. However, another Glabrizu pirate captain bluntly pointed out that this plan was a calculated gamble. If things didn't go as planned, it would have the opposite effect. The Flindian gnolls might be tempted to go ashore directly. Besides, Pharaoh and Ma Ko's fleet were not fools. They would not be fooled so easily. He preferred to fight in the open sea because he had the Cursed Throat fleet. In addition to the previous flagship, the Reaper, it was easier to achieve victory on the flanks. After a few rounds of bickering, it was Unoshur, the legendary captain, who suppressed the arguments of all parties. In the end, they decided to first arrange their troops to meet the enemy, and then use the familiar Seawolf battle strategy as a whole. It was still the same old tactic they used in the bottomless abyss, and there was no telling why they were bickering before the battle. Only then did the many pirate captains lead their men to prepare. Fortunately, the Gnoll god, Yinagu, was controlling the storm in Bite City. While supporting him, he also blocked Pharaoh's fleet. Otherwise, when the enemy fleet rushed over in formation, they would have to deal with the attack in a hurry, like a plate of loose sand. However, apart from the chaotic nature of the unorganized and undisciplined fleet, this fleet from the abyss actually had strength that could not be underestimated. Although the Cursed Throat fleet carried fewer cannons than the enemy, and they only took some flintlock rifles when they broke into the city, there were many archers on board, and their firing speed was far faster than the enemy's firearms. In the time it took Pharaoh and Ma Ko's flintlock soldiers to reload, the archers could shoot more arrows. However, these archers did not have armor, and the ships were not equipped with wooden parapets to resist continuous artillery fire. Therefore, their goal was to be fast and agile. If they couldn't do these two things, they would have died many times over. Anak took the lead this time. His new flagship, the Garaisai warship, was about half a mile in front of the other captains. It was now ready, keeping a certain distance from each other and forming a formation. There were still a few ships on the right flank that were a little behind and had just arrived at the front. The cannoneers on Pharaoh's side were crouching with lit fuses in their hands, observing the hundreds of warships that were rapidly approaching. The soldiers in the flintlock rifle team touched the weapons in their hands and murmured blessings to themselves. Everyone's heart was beating wildly. They readied themselves in the midst of a great clamor. When the two armies were about 150 yards apart, the order was given. A series of bright flashes, thunderous noises, and then thick smoke that covered the sky. At such a close distance, it was impossible for the cannons to miss. The iron spherical cannonballs whistled as they rushed into the group of advancing ships. Under the huge impact, some of the Cursed Throat warships were blown apart on the spot. 3 warships sank directly, and all the pirates on them fell into the turbulent sea. The great chaos caused the fleets on both sides to temporarily stop moving forward. Many ships collided with each other or desperately tried to stop. On the Garisai warship with Anak in charge, a lantern at the stern of the ship was blown away, and the splashing oil barely managed to avoid igniting the poop. However, the ram at the front of his flagship was also deeply embedded into the side of a warship of the same size, killing countless oarsmen and crew. Kill! Anak roared, his words concise. According to the rules of naval warfare, if they could win the first round of boarding, then the outcome of this battle would most likely be decided. Therefore, he did not hide anything at this time and directly revealed his abilities, taking the lead to swing onto the deck of the enemy's warship with the rope. The boarding battle was like a beach landing, and the brutality of it was far beyond the imagination of the average person. The crisp sound of oars breaking like a pistol shot, the tremors of the ships breaking apart when they collided with each other, the crackling of matchlocks, the terrifying whistling of arrows, painful cries, frenzied shouts, and the splashing of bodies falling into the sea continued for half an hourglass. Thick smoke covered the sky, and the ships staggered forward in the smoke, occasionally illuminated by the lightning and the storm, as if they had come out of nowhere, tearing at the sides of the enemy's ships. There was chaos and noise everywhere. The fatal storm of flintlock bullets and arrows raged everywhere. The sea seemed to be ignited by the continuous flames from the muzzles, fire horns, fire cans, and other weapons. Sometimes it was 3 galleys against 4, sometimes it was 4 against 6, and sometimes it was 7 or 8 against one unlucky ship. Everyone fought fiercely, determined to kill the other party, even if most of the pirates were mortals. Many Imperial guards and pirates had already boarded the other party's galleys. After a period of chaotic banging and banging, very few people were still alive. Scythes, swords, scimitars, iron-spiked hammers, daggers, battle axes, long swords, bows and arrows, flintlock rifles, and fire-type weapons all showed their prowess and killed countless people. Many Imperial guards, after their standard weapons broke, randomly picked up something on the ground and threw it at the enemy. The pirates of the bottomless abyss, although they did not know how to reload, some of them snatched the enemy's flintlock rifles and emptied the magazines. In addition to those killed by the various weapons, many others, although dodging these weapons, drowned after jumping into the sea. The sea had been dyed red with blood, and the roaring water became very murky. In the beginning, Pharaoh's navy had the upper hand. Their galleys were sturdier, and their formation was better maintained before the battle began. In addition to the warriors fighting with their lives, a large number of spellcasters also joined the battle. However, as the chaos rose, the Cursed Throat fleet seemed to have received some kind of blessing. In particular, some of the pirates who were originally Tana-reaped demons began to fight more and more bravely. Not only did the injuries on their bodies heal automatically, but their minds also became more flexible. For example, the captain of the Glabrizu, who was steering a ship of chaos, directly smashed his own ship with his Caliceri, and the ship of chaos immediately fell apart into 17 or 18 smaller warships. They broke up and dodged the gunfire from Pharaoh's golden ship. Like a pack of hunting wolves, they began to surround and disperse to attack the prey that had stopped moving forward. Not long after, even the deck of Pharaoh's golden ship broke out in close combat. The oarsmen tried to hide under the narrow benches, while the armed soldiers ran on the central deck, their armor clanking. Unos had jumped onto the golden ship from somewhere, and the captain of the Glabrizu pirate, who had shown his prowess earlier, was also supporting him. The two of them cooperated with each other and soon killed all the soldiers on the first deck. They were only stopped when they reached the mainmast. On the golden ship, the intricate walnut deck was soon covered with grease and dirty blood. The soldiers killed the enemy in this filth or fell to the ground and died. Although this flagship could get reinforcement from the other galleys around it, When the soldiers fighting at the bow fell to the ground and died, the reinforcements climbed up the ladder at the stern to reinforce. But those pirates were not careless either. Many of the cursed throat pirates who had taken advantage of the chaos to lower their boats and row over were also climbing up the side of the golden ship. In the end, even Pharaoh Mako joined the battle. Even if it was inconvenient for him to fight the enemy in close combat because of his injuries, the spellcasting ability inherited from the Great Vexil's legacy could not be underestimated. Leading a few black-robed mages, relying on the towering stern, they were like turrets, throwing spells at the bottomless abyss pirates who wanted to seize control of the golden ship. The teleportation spell has now been banned. However, the Null God will not easily go to the sea to fight, as long as we defeat the only sea force under his command. While fighting, Pharaoh was encouraging the morale of his men, or in more precise words, he was painting a pie in the sky for his men. If I want to kill someone, I will never rely on others. An abrupt voice suddenly interrupted Pharaoh's words. It turned out that there were many gnolls among the pirates who had climbed up the side of the golden ship. There were many Flyndian gnolls in the cursed throat fleet. At this moment, their eyes were flashing with a strange red light, and they all spoke in unison. Among these Flyndian gnolls, 3 of them were the most eye-catching. After boarding the ship, their bodies had been growing, and now they had become giant monsters. Any obstacle in front of these guys, whether it was the pirates or the imperial guards of the Medici Empire, will be smashed away by their arms wrapped in heavy iron chains. The black-robed mages wanted to use spells to deal with them, but when the spells hit the iron chains wrapped around their arms, they would bounce away and have no effect at all. It turned out that Yinagu had removed the chains from his divine artifact, the 3-headed flail, and handed them to the 3 gnolls hidden in the cursed throat fleet. With the connection of the divine artifact, the power of his physical incarnation at this time descended into the bodies of these 3 gnolls at the smallest price. As soon as they appeared, these 3 gnolls with the status of God's attachment set off a bloody storm. The spearhead was directed at the Pharaoh King Mako. Chapter 929. There were more than a dozen different theories about the last moment of the Battle of Goldenhorn Bay, which gave the last king of the Medici Empire a different degree of heroism. The most likely scenario was that the king of the Medici Empire was wearing a bright robe, which was very conspicuous. Therefore, when he was fighting with 3 gnolls possessed by demons on the stern, he was unfortunately attacked by pirates with long-range weapons such as javelins or bows. A gnoll in the state of God took the opportunity to cut off one of his arms and swallowed it into his stomach. However, a legendary black-robed mage tried his best to save the king and took him all the way out of Goldenhorn Bay on a flying carpet. The evil spirits shouted victory. The human skin flag with the 3-headed chain emblem of Yinagu was raised to the top of the mast of the golden ship. The Uno soldier led his men to clean up the entire golden ship and realized that the battle was over, so he returned to his flagship. Of course, this was only one of the many theories, although there were not many records of this battle in later generations. After all, from a historical point of view, both sides involved in the battle were actually losers. But there was no doubt that the defeat in the Battle of Goldenhorn Bay did announce the complete destruction of the Pharaoh Mako's regime. Not only would he never set foot on this land again in this life, but the great empire would also fall apart. However, although Mako lost a lot, he was not the worst loser in this war. According to the normal script, after the Battle of Goldenhorn Bay, the Null God Yinagu should be the final winner. Unfortunately, he met a screenwriter with a big brain. Just as the flag of this evil god was flying high everywhere in Bite City, a strange change suddenly occurred. First, outside the city. As the Flinders gnolls and ghouls invaded Bite, only a handful of gnolls were left outside the city, unable to do anything about it. It was not that they did not receive Lord Yinagu's order to attack the city, but they went too far to hunt during the day, so they came a little late. But they came late and did not have the first bite of hot fresh meat. These unlucky guys were the first to leave. Just as they gradually gathered to enter the city, the desert skyline suddenly surged with wind and clouds. Teams of desert elf knights, riding grayscale birds and six-legged horses, rushed to these gnolls who were a little confused. Their journey was not peaceful at all. They were trampled by thousands of soldiers, shot by assault rifles, and slashed by scimitars. The unlucky Flindian jack-o'-lanterns were not able to organize an effective resistance at all. They were harvested one after another like rice in the fields during the harvest season. There were also some spellcasters who wanted to escape, but their god had just unleashed a divine ability and used the heavenly storm power to restrict the spatial teleportation of this world. Moreover, due to the fact that the heavenly god authority was incomplete and couldn't be released or retracted at will, he could only wait for the restriction to dissipate on its own. Therefore, for the time being, the Gnoll sorcerers could only escape as Gnoll, Elven than Gnoll, Gnoll of the Gnoll, Gnoll, LOL. Even if some Gnoll sorcerers knew how to protect against arrows, the power of electromagnetic nail guns was not the same as that of bows. And even if one bullet could not break through the defense, what about 2 bullets? 3 bullets. The sudden change outside the city quickly attracted the attention of the army in the city, but they had no time to care about other things at this time. In the northeast area of Bite City, the originally closed gate of the Big Bazaar suddenly opened. Rows of valiant warriors in full armor poured out wave after wave. It was as if there was no end in sight. It turned out that the underground warehouse here had long been bought by the scale of perpetual order. Since the beginning of the siege of Bite City and before the Yinnik ancient teleportation seal, a large number of warriors had hidden in the underground warehouse through the underground portal. These warriors, wearing the latest model of fanatic armor and holding assault rifle with bayonets, had long been bored out of their minds. When the commander of the Legion gave the order, they immediately set off. Like a living torrent, they set off along the streets and alleys of Bite City, clearing out every Tana, Reed demon, Flinder Gnoll, and ghoul they saw. Unlike the troops of the Medici Empire who were trapped in the city because they lost contact with Pharaoh and were unable to board the warship with him, this army that suddenly appeared under the banner of Megalosaurus Pasha was not only better equipped, everyone was wearing fanatic armor, but also many of the warriors were not human. There were the polar bear men, camel men, and walrus men from the island world, who were strong in their own right. Not to mention the ordinary gnolls and ghouls. Even the purebred Tana, Reed demons evolved from the original demons would not be able to take advantage of these warriors. For example, a powerful flaming demon encountered a team of polar bear men. The flaming demon was a kind of demon with great ambition. They tried in vain to dominate the abyss like the Balers, but only in vain. Therefore, if an ordinary Tana wanted to evolve into a flaming demon, they had to go through a mysterious trial related to fire before the evolution was successful. After becoming a flaming demon, this kind of Tana would burn with an inextinguishable flame. Unlike other Tana, they were immune to fire damage. Scholars who studied demons once asserted that the form of a flaming demon might be an important step in the evolution of a Baler. In other words, many flaming demons who were not born as Balers had once been flaming demons when they were weak. As evidence, the Balers in the bottomless abyss loved having the flaming demons as their heralds. Of course, those Balers would not be so kind as to guide the younger generation. Most of them wanted to personally supervise the hidden dangers that might threaten them, or they simply enjoyed the pleasure of enslaving such ambitious demons. However, the flaming demon was a slender demon with dark blue skin and bony vestigial wings on its back. It was indeed troublesome to deal with. When they fought, they would emit aura of fear at the beginning to frighten the opponent. Whether the aura of fear worked or not, the flaming demon would usually use high-temperature flames to roast the enemy in the second wave of attack. And in the end, they would carry a giant sword made of flames. Indeed, it was somewhat similar to the flaming beheading sword of the Balers, and rush forward to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the opponent. However, when the polar bear men warriors encountered the flaming demon, they relied on the resistance granted by the fanatic armor and rushed to the front of the flaming demon together. While suppressing the flaming demon in the corner of the street with electromagnetic nail guns, they neatly reached for a set of alchemy potions in their waist pockets that were dispensed in advance before they set off. Each of them took out a bottle of frost potion. They did not care about martial ethics at all. No, they did not hesitate at all. Like throwing grenades, the three strong polar bear men threw the frost potion in their hands at the unlucky flaming demon. The wings were just decorations and could not fly. There was a restriction in Yinagu in the city, and teleportation could not be used. Blocked by the three polar bear men in the corner, there was nowhere to hide. The three bottles of frost potion shattered, and the flaming demon, who had negative natural resistance to ice damage, the difference between the flaming demon and the other towers, was directly frozen into an ice sculpture. Bang, bang, bang. After a few gunshots, the dying flaming demon was purged by the polar bearman warriors with bullets. The worst was yet to come. Chapter 9:30. The death of the demon Tana Re in the material plane was not certain. They had a chance to return to the bottomless abyss and be reborn again. This was somewhat similar to the Batsa Devil, but it was not exactly the same. If the Batsa Devil died in the material plane, he would basically be reborn in the depths of the 9 prisons of Bader after 99 years. Of course, his strength would also decline a little. If the demon Tana Re died in the material plane, there is a certain probability that he would be reborn in the bottomless abyss. It was just that he did not have to wait 99 years, and his strength would not necessarily decline. Although the flaming demon that had been smashed into ice shards was already dead, its body was slowly transforming into foam. If there was a scholar who was proficient in the study of demons present and saw the changes in the demon's corpse, he would most likely judge that this flaming demon might be relatively lucky and would be able to reappear somewhere in the bottomless abyss soon. With this kind of luck, this flaming demon might also be able to become a Baylor demon. However, just as the few polar bear warriors turned to leave and continued to clear the other demons along the street, a strange-looking ferocious beast suddenly appeared here. This monster's head and tail were shaped like a megalosaurus. It had sharp teeth and a single horn on its head. Its body was similar to a tiger or leopard, and it had dark red diamond-shaped scales all over its body. Looking at the broken ice on the ground, it opened its mouth wide. Crunch, crunch, the monster devoured the remains of the flaming demon as if it were munching on ice sand. Perhaps because it had eaten cold food, it felt a little cold in its stomach, so it wanted to eat something warm to nourish its appetite. Therefore, it raised its head and sniffed the tip of its nose. After smelling the scent of another flaming demon a few miles away, it disappeared on the spot. When it reappeared, it was already behind the flaming demon. Oh, whoa, that's right. This was the Yazi beast that was created by Keys using Leviathan's flesh and blood and then released into the bottomless abyss by chance. When the scale of perpetual order found out that the Talit devil was causing trouble in Bite City, the Chamber of Commerce contacted the Yazi behemoth, the ancestor of the Yazi beast clan, who was wantonly hunting devils in the 4th layer of the bottomless abyss. The Chamber of Commerce then dispatched a group of Yazi beasts who liked to eat devils. Perhaps some people would suspect that with Yinaga's restriction, Bite City was temporarily unable to use the teleportation art. How could these Yazi beasts come and go without a trace? In fact, the reason was very simple. They did not use the advanced teleportation spell that basically all demons knew. Instead, they used the innate spell Abyss Jump that was bestowed by the bottomless abyss. As long as there was abyssal demonic aura, the Yazi beast would be able to come and go as it pleased. As a brand new race that had taken root in the bottomless abyss, the will of the abyss favored the Yazi clan very much. Because they liked to eat devils, they even received a special reward from the will of the abyss. In addition to the abnormal innate spell, Abyss Jump, the Yazi clan was also born with the ability Reverse Summon Tali. Unlike the Tali clan who summoned their own kind to fight together, the Yazi clan summoned Ta-Li in reverse. Even if they used the Abyss Jump to appear beside the summoned target, their purpose was not to fight, but simply to eat. Therefore, the selected, warm, flaming demon had now become a delicacy in the stomach of the Yazi beast. After being swallowed by the Yazi beast, those Talit devils were considered dead and could not be resurrected in the bottomless abyss. And this was also the general policy of the scale of perpetual order in this battle, to eliminate all the devils. They did not want to leave any hidden dangers when they took over Byte City in the future. There were a total of 230 markets in Byte City. The whole city was made up of these markets connected by streets and alleys. From the underground warehouse of the Grand Bazaar in the northeast corner of the city, more than 50,000 soldiers in fanatic armor poured out of it. However, compared to this huge city, the number of these soldiers was just a drop in the bucket. They were barely enough to clean up the invading devils, jack-o'-lanterns, and ghouls along the streets, but it was no different from a fool's dream to complete the occupation of the city. Of course, the scale of perpetual order had prepared a backup plan. When the counterattack against the invaders of the bottomless abyss was launched inside and outside Byte City, teams of Leviathan behemoths suddenly appeared in the sky outside Golden Horn Bay. These huge airships had been patrolling the outer sea for a long time. After receiving the order to counterattack, they rushed to Byte City at once. Following them were Megalosaurus that had entered the adult stage. Most of these Megalosaurus were blue dragons, but there were also several other kinds of five-color dragons mixed in. Most of them were higher dragons hired by the scale of perpetual order from various planes. And those adult blue dragons were all members of the Blue Dragon clan in the Ash World. More than 100 adult Megalosaurus spread their wings and flew together, covering the sky and the sun. Even the demon lord Yenagu had to be moved by this scene. This, Yenagu gasped. Byte City, which had become cold because of the invaders of the bottomless abyss day and night, warmed up a little out of thin air. Just when he saw that the situation was not right and wanted to call back the Cursed Throat Fleet in the Golden Horn Bay to concentrate on dealing with this change. Those Megalosaurus that flew in from the outer sea took action first. They swooped straight down from the sky and pounced on the stunned pirates of the bottomless abyss. Megalosaurus were good at aerial combat. When they fell from the sky, they clamped their wings, and when they landed on top of the pirates' ships, they suddenly opened their wings. The air caught not only caused them to break, but also turned into huge air hammers that smashed into the pirates of the Cursed Throat Fleet. Some of the less sturdy warships were directly smashed into pieces and fell into silence. And the sturdier ones were not much better. The ship was sturdy, but how sturdy could the people standing on the deck be? Hit by the air hammers, many pirates were smashed into a pile of meat patties on the deck. However, the surviving pirates did not have to grieve because they were about to face an even more terrifying encounter. After those Megalosaurus swooped down, they opened their bloody mouths. Lightning, flames, acid, poisonous gas, frosty wind. The various breaths that the five-color dragons were used to ravage the pirates' ships one after another. It was quite the scene of, "I'll take the stage after you finish singing." Occasionally, there were a few black dragons that drilled into the sea and used their sharp fangs and claws to dig out large holes in the bottom of the pirate ships, causing them to sink into the sea. Almost none of the pirates who fell into the water could survive. Although those black dragons appeared to be emaciated, they were in fact starving ghosts reincarnated. As long as a pirate fell into the water, they would rush forward to tear and devour without any explanation. Later, some gluttonous white dragons also joined in. They froze some pirates who were struggling with the deck into ice sculptures and chewed and tasted them. Unpresentable guys, the adult blue dragon, Iron-Tail Gorgia, who was in charge of leading the dragons in battle, saw the embarrassing behavior of some of his cousins and wanted to go on a rampage. "Didn't I let you have a full meal before the battle? Are you so hungry that you can't be choosy?" He angrily spat out a crackling lightning again, knocking down all the pirates on the deck who were shooting arrows at him. Then, his iron tail smashed heavily on the side of the warship. Bang! The ship capsized and the people died. The black dragons and white dragons were very busy eating. Chapter 9:31. The dragons were raging. However, what attracted Yinagu's attention was the giant airships. Even from a distance, the Knoll god could feel the surging vitality of the Leviathan behemoths. What kind of magic beast is this? Because he was obsessed with competing with other demon lords for territory, he didn't participate in bloody battles. He had never seen such a large-scale biological vehicle. He thought they were powerful magic behemoths. Of course, he wasn't wrong to think so. The Leviathan airships were also very powerful, especially the Nephremon disc transformed from the legendary Megalosaurus. It was the most representative. The airdrop battle begins. Ready, drop. Nephremon disc issued the airdrop command to the other Leviathan airships. The belly cabins of each airship were all opened. Soldiers wearing light fanatic armor, holding iron shovels, claw hammers, and some other weapons that didn't look like combat equipment, walked out of the airships one by one. They jumped down and fell to the place where the fireworks of a specific color were ignited in Bite City. Each of them carried a one-time feather fall spell talisman to ensure that they wouldn't fall to their deaths from high altitude. When their feet stepped on the ground, the ceramic talisman would shatter, and these people would quickly gather in one place according to the previous division. These people were special forces trained by the scale of perpetual order, field engineers. The places where they landed were all the places where the assault troops had confirmed that they had finished cleaning up the demons. After landing on the ground and quickly gathering, these field engineers immediately began to build battlefield fortifications at a speed visible to the naked eye with the tools and materials they carried. Because they were fighting in Bite City, the fortifications they were asked to build before the war were watchtowers. Wearing light fanatic armor, they might be slightly inferior to the assault troops in their ability to charge, but the strength and endurance of the field engineers were not inferior to the latter. With the clanking of tools, he used the materials that he had brought from the sky to complete the basic construction. These field engineers then dismantled some building materials, such as slabs and bricks from the surrounding buildings in Bite City, to complete the repair work of the watchtowers. This kind of watchtower was about 15 yards high. The base was firmly stacked with building materials, such as slabs and slabs. The middle part was made of hollow steel pipes engraved with runes. At the top was an octagonal pavilion with a roof. Most of these watchtowers were built at the intersection of streets and alleys, and some formed a corner between each other. In some Fuyu market with dense buildings and mansions, some watchtowers were directly repaired by the field engineers on the flat roof of the houses. For this reason, they also reinforced the building as the base. Every time a watchtower was built, someone among the field engineers would take out a starter gun and shoot a signal flare into the sky. The Edite, winged kobold, airmen who flew out of the Leviathan airship after the field engineers would join forces to carry large wooden barrels, fly to the location marked by the signal flare, and throw them to the ground. Before the airdrop, they would ignite the fuse on the wooden barrel. Soon, an imperceptible explosion would occur above the barrel, and the parachutes loaded in the barrel would quickly rise and land smoothly on the ground. Picking up the equipment in the airdrop, the field engineers immediately transformed into occupying siege troops. They would be stationed in their own watchtowers and block the streets with heavy nail guns to prevent a counterattack from the remnants of the demon army. In addition, some of the most elite field engineers would cooperate with the assault troops who were too far away from the main force to build watchtowers in the markets densely populated with Tana-Reet demons, Flinders gnolls, and ghouls, and wait for reinforcement from the follow-up troops. Among them, the 8 field engineers parachuted near the Ox and Lion Palace were the most conspicuous. In front of the Golden Palace, where the invaders of the bottomless abyss were most densely gathered, they established 8 bases that relied on each other and fought off waves of enemies together with hundreds of warriors of the assault team. Even Yinagu was alarmed by this group of people. The Knoll god, who was still at the dock of Golden Horn Bay, wanted to command the Cursed Throat fleet to resist the attack of the dragons, but he was forced back by the thorn that suddenly pierced into the back of his own army. Damn it! Yinagu recalled the power of his incarnation, and the chains of the 3-headed flail recombined into a weapon. But when he was about to attack, a thunderous noise suddenly sounded in the south of Byte City. A giant more than 50 yards tall, wearing an exoskeleton mech without any gaps, fell from the sky and smashed into a place not far from the city gate. The city wall, which had experienced the scorching fire and the impact of the flood, completely collapsed because of the violent vibration, as if an earth dragon had turned over. That demigod ogre. The Knoll god's eyes widened. After killing Gorelick, it was because he saw Nalu's figure that he gave up the idea of letting Flinders Knolls forage for food. He commanded his army to attack Medica's other places until he attacked Byte City. If Yinaga hadn't guessed that there must be some connection between Nalu's reappearance, the sudden emergence of an unbelievably powerful army after Byte City was broken, and the news of the ancient Knoll god, Gorelick, attracted him to come to the Ash World, then he was really a stupid dog. Who is this guy's work? Is there any other backup plan? The mottled hair covered his livid face, and a light flashed in the eyes of the Knoll god. At this time, he didn't care about using his divine power in the Ash World, the land abandoned by the Lord God. He quickly used his divine power to ask for information from his believers scattered all over Byte City. He wanted to check if there were any abnormalities. They also met the Drows. Is this the trick of that female spider? In the blink of an eye, Yinagu's divine mind finished processing all kinds of information. He saw the scenes of them encountering the Drows in some big houses from the brains of some believers, and even the wax demons. Danger. Although it was just a mistake, Yinagu still felt a very urgent sense of threat. Knowing the historical achievements of the Spider Queen, he didn't dare to relax in the slightest. My avatar, compared to the hundreds of thousands of Flinders Knolls in the city, of course, the former is more important. Even if there were some mortals and a large number of ghouls in his army, when weighing the pros and cons, those guys were not even qualified to enter the small ledger in Yinaga's heart. As long as my avatar can return to the bottomless abyss, even if the Spider Queen has any conspiracy with the previous killing of Golalic, I won't lose anything. Chapter 9:32. Yinagu wanted to slip away. Because things had become too chaotic, he felt that he was about to lose control and was about to be trapped in the big net that was the world of ashes. As a god and a demon lord, Yinagu's perception had undoubtedly reached a height that mortals could not understand. As long as he wanted something, it would most likely come true. Of course, even if he retreated, he would not easily give up the benefits that he had already swallowed. Moreover, when the situation was unclear, he could not abandon the army under his command. Pass down my order. The Knoll god ordered loudly. Don't continue to fight with the army in Byte City. All troops turn around and charge towards the south of the city. Take everything that you can carry and set fire to those that you can't carry. In short, get out of the city as soon as possible. Receiving the god's order, the Flinders Knolls began to loot regardless of the consequences. Thick smoke rose from Byte City. In less than half an hourglass, except for the market occupied by the assault troops of the Scales of Eternal Order, most of the other places in the city were set ablaze. The Nephrman Dis, who was commanding the Leviathan airship fleet in the sky, immediately ordered the airships, according to the rehearsal plan, launch rain-increasing missiles to suppress the fire in the city. Don't let the Knolls succeed in their plot. Bang, bang, bang. All the Leviathan airships opened the hatches of the missiles mounted on them. The rain-increasing missiles, which were urgently changed by the kobold pilots of the Dragonborn clan, were launched one after another. They turned a corner and flew into the clouds. Accompanied by bursts of explosions, the alchemy powder carried by the missiles were all scattered. Originally, because Yinagu controlled the power of the storm, there were continuous lightning and thunder near Byte City. When the rain-increasing missile exploded in the clouds, the alchemy powder, which had absorbed enough rainwater, fell down from the clouds along with the heavy rain, washing over the burning markets of Byte City. In this way, the Knolls running in the streets and alleys all became dogs in the water, unconsciously barking. However, with the suppression of the leaders of the clans, they did not make any trouble. They obediently carried the supplies that they had plundered from the city and drove the human slaves whose necks were tied with hemp ropes. They followed the orders of the gods and rushed towards the south of the city. There were also a large number of abyss ghouls and necrophilia demons among them. As for the ordinary ghouls that had just been transformed and lacked intelligence, as well as the other Thanner reaped demons who were unwilling to obey Yeenagu's order, the Jackalan army simply ignored them. Instead, they allowed them to continue to roam around Bite City and cause trouble. You want to leave? It's not that easy. Just as the army that crawled out of the bottomless abyss was about to cross the crumbling city wall in the south of Bite City, the strong ogre Neru, who had been standing still like a falling rock, suddenly let out a thunderous roar that shook the earth. After defeating Vaprak and refining the divinity of the ogre god, Neru could now be considered a demigod of the ogres. Although he was shouting in the common language of the Ash world, the gnolls could still understand what he was saying. Of course, actions were always more persuasive than words. The storm exoskeleton mecha on Neru's body began to transform. 8 spider-like mechanical arms stretched out from the back, and the front of each arm was loaded with a heavy machine gun. As the electric current surged, steel nails more than a foot long and as thick as a finger were ejected by magnetic force. Because these bullets were fired by electromagnetic force instead of gunpowder, the sound they made was not clatter, but whoosh, and the power was extremely shocking. To be more precise, even the gods were moved by this. Witnessing the lethality of the electromagnetic machine gun, Yeenagu was a little frightened. As long as the bullets hit the gnolls, even if some gnoll sorcerers cast protective spells, such as Protective Arrow, on themselves, as long as the bullets hit the gnolls, the magic shields would shatter. The best-case scenario was that half of the body would be cut off, and the worst-case scenario would be that the gnoll would explode into a mist of blood. What's more, a bullet could kill 7 or 8 jackalans. The barrage of bullets stopped the Flinders jackalans at the edge of the city wall, unable to take another step forward. Damn it! Yeenagu quickly weighed the pros and cons. After judging that Neru's strength was probably slightly inferior to his current avatar, the Jackalan god gritted his teeth and stepped out of the crowd. He ran quickly in a zigzag pattern, avoiding the flying steel nails and bullets. Moreover, as he ran, his body was also growing little by little. When he finally pounced on the strong ogre, Yeenagu had transformed into a huge jackal like a mountain. The giant jackal that Yeenagu transformed into had some characteristics of the hyenas. After killing the ancient Jackalan god, Golik, he also obtained some of the other party's special abilities. Unlike the usual giant transformation, when facing a huge opponent, Yeenagu now turned into a giant beast after revealing his true form. Back off. He did not shout die, but only back off. One had to admit that this Jackalan god was really clear-headed. His front claws waved the 3-headed flail and swung it at Neru. His purpose was direct and clear, which was to force the opponent to retreat. Neru did retreat. Although the ogre was reckless, he was not stupid. As a master of weapons, Neru was actually very wise when fighting. While retreating quickly, the 8 arms that extended from the storm kinetic skeleton and were equipped with electromagnetic machine guns were all aimed at Yeenagu, who was flying towards him. It was almost shooting in the face, making it impossible for the opponent to dodge. Pa 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 pa. After being hit by a few bullets and some of his fur was broken, Yeenagu decisively gave up resisting. He waved the 3-headed flail tightly to block the steel nails that were shot at him. However, even so, the Jackalan god was still rushing forward. He wanted to force Neru to retreat a little more. Otherwise, the Jackalan army under his command would not be able to rush out of Bite City. However, after retreating for nearly a kilometer, Nalu suddenly stopped in his tracks. A huge ebony chain appeared in his hand. The weapon, which was reinforced with fine gold, clanged against Yeenagu's 3-headed flail. The dozens of chains at the front of the ebony chain and the chains on the 3-headed flail were immediately entangled together. Although the 3-headed flail was a divine artifact, and the quality of the 3 chains on it was much higher than the chains at the front of the ebony chain, it could not withstand the number of the latter, so it was still entangled tightly. This also reflected the weapon master Neru's usual criteria when choosing weapons. More was better, and sturdiness was king. "Don't go," Nera shouted excitedly. The ogre held the ebony chain in one hand and used his strength to force Yeenagu to expose himself. His other arm quickly punched. The 8 mechanical arms behind him all turned into sharp claws at this time, clamping Yeenagu's 2 arms tightly. Bang! Neru's fist with fine gold spikes hit the face of Yeenagu's avatar and tore off a large piece of flesh. It had been many years since the last time Yeenagu was slapped in the face like this. The Jackalen god was furious. Chapter 9:33. Anger was anger. Although Yeenagu was extremely furious, he could not break free from the bondage. Although he was extremely furious, he could not break free from the bondage. In front of a large number of Flinder's Knoll believers, the Knoll god was slapped in the face by Neru, who was wearing the Storm kinetic skeleton. In desperation, he could only hurriedly use a talent spell ability that he had not fully prepared, the Enfeeble emblem. Yeenagu's eyes flashed, and 2 emblems formed by various entangled runes were projected from his eyeballs to Neru the ogre in an instant. Unlike the Enfeeble emblem used by ordinary spellcasters, the Enfeeble emblem used by Yeenagu was more effective. It could make the target's physique, strength, and agility fall into a low point for a long time. However, this time, he was really not fully prepared, so the effect of the Enfeeble emblem was greatly reduced. After Neru was hit, he just took a few steps back. With the divinity he plundered from Vaprak, he was soon immune to the negative effects of the spell. And in these few seconds, Yeenagu did not take the opportunity to sneak attack. Or rather, he could not do that. Suddenly, he felt a strange magic wave coming. The Knoll god, who was proficient in jumping and rolling, jumped high on the spot and somersaulted into the distance. "Want to run? Where can you run to?" Just as Yeenagu leaped into the air, a sonorous voice suddenly sounded. The steampunk half-lich revealed his figure that had been hidden for a long time. Snade's adamantine body twisted, and the metal arm fell heavily to the ground, causing the earth to tremble. Not good. Yeenagu's eyes widened. As soon as he stepped on the ground, he felt the magic wave from before again, entangling his incarnation like a maggot attached to the bone. Hundreds of totem cylinders made of fine steel suddenly broke out of the ground, and the magic lock that had been arranged in advance was suddenly activated. And Yeenagu was like a marionette being dragged to the area covered by the magic lock. Even if he resisted in every way, he could not slow down this process at all. The reason why the Knoll god fell into the trap was that some catalyst had been buried inside its incarnation. The ogre, Nalu, had just shot at him with the electromagnetic cannon. Among the bullets, there were many reinforced steel nails engraved with runes by the steampunk demi-lich. These foreshadowing that had been buried in advance had now all become life-taking talismans, and Yeenagu's incarnation was finally covered by the mystic lock. Greater Subjugation Curse, Phantom Killer, Evar's Black Tentacles, Acid Rune Trap, Fire Rune Trap. Each totem pole was engraved with runes, and it was activated at the same time. As many as hundreds of spells were cast on the incarnation of the Knoll god. Labyrinth was generally a compound spell used for defense. But this labyrinth that Snade made specifically to deal with Yeenagu was completely to severely injure this demon lord with the title of god. That's right, the steampunk Demilich was not naive enough to think that Yeenagu would be so easy to kill. He did this to weaken his opponent. Damn mortal! Owl! After being ravaged by hundreds of spells, there was almost no intact hair on Yeenagu's body. The originally mottled dark brown fur had disappeared. Now his whole body was full of charred pits that were corroded by strong acids, or charred flesh that was smoking. Fortunately, with the activation of the mystic lock, the catalysts embedded in his body were also detonated. Yeenagu gritted his teeth and forcibly pulled out the remaining steel nails. In this way, although the power of the mystic lock was great, it was no longer as unavoidable as before. However, Nalu attacked again at this time, swinging the ebony chain and chopping down on Yeenagu's head. The Knoll God once again raised the three-headed chain to block. Because the combo of the ogre was too dense, Yenigu could only passively block for a while. Many skills such as slash and armor break that he was proficient in were almost completely useless at this time. This battle made him very depressed. Then, the sudden change in the battlefield made him feel even more depressed. As they fought, Nala the ogre threw out a few huge glassware in the shape of a jar from time to time. After it fell to the ground and broke, the dark green liquid inside quickly spilled on the ground. This was an enhanced version of the troll regeneration potion newly developed by Nalu's brother, the ogre, which Dr. Peru. It was mixed with the genetic characteristics of the Leviathan behemoth. Nalu deliberately sprinkled it on the flesh and blood of Yenigu's body that had fallen due to the spell bombardment. Soon, these flesh and blood underwent amazing changes. They began to grow, and the neighboring flesh and blood fragments actually fused with each other. In less than 1/6 of an hourglass, a monster that was 70% to 80% similar to Yenigu appeared on the battlefield. Attack Yenigu! Since this monster had the hereditary traits of the Leviathan behemoth in its body, Nephimandes, an existence with a higher sequence among the Leviathan creatures, who had been monitoring the battlefield from the sky above, saw that it had grown up and immediately gave the order. The newborn little Yenigu roared and pounced on its body. Seeing this, Nalu the ogre hurriedly waved his ebony chain to swing away the three-headed flail and quickly retreated, away from the field where the dog fight was about to break out. One big and one small, the two Yenigu were biting each other. The Flinders Jackalans were dumbfounded by this scene. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Nalu the ogre controlled the storm kinetic skeleton, stretched out 8 mechanical arms, and used the electromagnetic cannons mounted on them to target these gnolls. On the battlefield outside Bite City, strange cries gradually sounded, and it was quite funny. After half an hourglass, the two Yenigu finally came to a conclusion. The Knoll God was finally proven to be a fraud. However, in order to tear apart the fake products that appeared in front of him, many wounds appeared on Yenigu's body again. And when he looked at his army, after Nalu the ogre's special care and the repeated harvesting of the scale of perpetual order, the Flinders gnolls that he brought from the bottomless abyss had been killed. Those who were lucky enough to survive were desperately fleeing in all directions. The ones in charge of hunting down his minions were groups of subspecies that looked taller and stronger than ordinary elves. Yenigu actually did not know about desert elves. They hunted the gnolls unscrupulously as if they were hunting prey. This scene was very similar to when Yenigu let the gnolls hunt the mortals of the Medici Empire. The so-called karma was nothing more than this. Chapter 9:34. Slip away, slip away. Yenigu immediately made a decision. The Knoll God did not care about his image. He rolled on the ground and turned into a slightly smaller gnoll. Then, he rushed to the east like an arrow leaving the bow. It had to be admitted that when a demon lord or the incarnation of a god was determined to escape, it was really difficult to control them. Even if the scale of perpetual order had set up an inescapable net and was ready to deal with Yenigu's counterattack, it could not stop him from wanting to escape. Panicked like a stray dog. Although it sounded a little ironic, seeing the current situation and thinking about it carefully, it actually made sense. His home had been destroyed. If he did not run away, would he stay and wait for death? He ran at full speed, faster than a bird. Yenigu quickly ran out of the area where Bite City belonged. Because he had used the Storm Authority to restrict the use of space teleportation spells here, he now had to run a long distance before he could use advanced teleportation spells. In the Ash World, I have killed the ancient Knoll God Gallic. As long as this incarnation can return to the Dark Prairie, I will not lose anything on this trip. While comforting himself, the Knoll God continuously used advanced teleportation spells. He kept disappearing, flashing, disappearing, until he was hundreds of miles away from Bite City. Standing still, he immediately summoned the Gate of Assembly again. This magic item of unknown level that Yinagu had obtained by chance had just finished its channeling at this time. Jagged rocks rose from the ground, forming a door with a circular outline. Powerful space magic energy began to brew in this door, enough to connect the material plane and the bottomless abyss. But strangely, there were no magic fluctuations overflowing. What a good treasure! You were still reliable. Well, he could see the scene of the dark prairie in the bottomless abyss. Yinagu immediately strode forward and hurried into the gate of assembly. However, as soon as he walked in, a huge figure that covered the sky appeared above the gate of assembly. Keys returned to the ash world from the astral realm. What a great treasure! It's just that it's been covered in dust for many years. Seeing that the assembly gate was about to dissipate, the young blue dragon's eyes immediately became scorching hot, and there really was a faint flash of lightning in his eyes. Fortunately, I came back in time. A surging force field gushed out from Keys's body and enveloped the assembly gate on the ground in an instant. The dissipation of the treasure slowed down for a moment. Let me think. Where should I send that stray dog? After taking control of the treasure, Keys began to think about how to trick Yinagu. After all, this guy had committed so many sins in the Ash world. How could it be so easy for him to leave just like that? That's it, the 66th floor of the bottomless abyss, the spider magic web. I wish you a peaceful death. Keys focused his mind, and circles of dense runes suddenly appeared on the rock outline of the assembly gate, just like the super complicated password lock on some mechanical safes. Following the blue dragon's gaze, a few of the runes suddenly burst out with red light. Click! The space energy stirred violently in the assembly gate, so much so that some debris was rubbed off the rugged rock door frame. Next time, I have to make a new door for this treasure. Otherwise, when I adjust the projection location like this, it may suddenly collapse. Keys thought. Soon, the scene of the silent prairie opposite the assembly gate disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a strange corner of the spider magic web bit wall of the bottomless abyss. That bit wall was very abnormal. Except for the area covered by the spider web, there was no gravity on the 66th floor of the bottomless abyss. Countless overlapping floorboards formed an endless web, the spider's web. Each of the flawless stone floorboards was 20 feet wide and 3 feet thick. If the thick layer of spider web attached to it was brushed away, it could be found that the natural patterns on a rock floor were undergoing some subtle changes all the time, constantly forming the distorted bodies and faces of those fallen souls. The sticky spider web wrapped around the passage, forming a tubular corridor. Although the stickiness of these spider webs was quite light, it would still make people feel uncomfortable. Furthermore, if one wanted to pass through the spider web, they would be trapped if their climbing skills were not up to par. Not only that, these spider webs were immune to fire, cold, and electric damage. Furthermore, these spider webs were harder than steel, and ordinary weapons would find it difficult to break through them. Above these cobweb tunnels, endless clouds of dust were rotting and dark, surging like huge waves, filling the entire space. Travelers who dared to enter these clouds either had strong enough bodies or were too ignorant. Usually, the latter was more likely. They would be sucked into the chaos of the bottomless abyss forever, falling far below Lolth's web, into the terrifying weave pit. Even more tragic was the fact that the gravity of this floor was chaotic. They would most likely not fall to their deaths, but instead become the prey of the savage, demon-hunting spiders entrenched in the weave pit. Furthermore, due to the obstruction of the extraordinary will of the demon lord of this floor, the Spider Queen Lolth, it was very difficult to use teleportation spells in the spider magic web. Only some of her most favored subordinates were qualified to hold extremely evil geometric carvings, which allowed them to teleport between specific locations in the spider magic web. Most of these key shapes were steel pyramids, silver balls, bronze octagonal stars, and blue crystal cubes. Yinagu's avatar returned to the bottomless abyss. When passing through the gate of assembly, the Knoll God felt that the experience of crossing planes was a little different from before. It was not as easy as before. It felt like someone had kicked through a narrow door. Fortunately, his physique was extraordinary. If it were an ordinary gnoll, he might have been squeezed half to death when passing through the gate of assembly. What's going on? Did the gate of assembly? Just when he was worried about his treasure, he suddenly realized that the touch of his feet was a little strange. The ground was very soft, similar to the touch of the thorns on the dark prairie. But why was there a trace of stickiness? The spider magic web? Yenigu suddenly realized where he was. He widened his eyes in surprise and suddenly turned back, only to find that the gate of assembly had disappeared. No matter how much he tried to summon it, the treasure at the bottom of his chest no longer responded. I knew it. Damn spiders. It must be that spider bitch. The gnoll god was seething with anger. The loss of the gate of assembly made him lose his mind in an instant. He did not care that he was now in the territory of other demon lords. He began to slaughter the unlucky Tana re-demons around him indiscriminately. The latter was extremely miserable. Chapter 9:35. Why was Keys able to control the assembly gate? The reason for this matter started from the ruins that the young blue dragon found in the astral plane. That ruin was the tomb of a strength dragon. As one of the 3 legendary dragon clans, although the strength dragon was not as abnormal as the time dragon, who became a legendary creature right after hatching from its shell, it still needed to grow into a young dragon to become a legendary creature. However, its strength was definitely not something that ordinary creatures could imagine. Not to mention growing into an immemorial dragon, primordial dragon, or ancient dragon. The strength dragon that lived until the age of an extremely old dragon was actually qualified to wrestle with some of the weaker gods. If the strength dragon was ruthless to itself, it might even be able to win. The ruin that Keys found was the tomb of a strength dragon that was in the immemorial dragon stage. The so-called immemorial dragon was actually a general term for Megalosaurus that was over 1,200 years old. Even if it lived for more than 10,000 years, it was still an immemorial dragon. As for the strength dragon that built the tomb for itself in the astral plane, even with a conservative estimate, its age was more than 10,000 years old, or even more. The reason why Keys came to such a conclusion was that after chasing away the Slad Lord Zoo and entering the tomb of the strength dragon, he found the remains of the Megalosaurus. Based on the growth patterns of the bones, he deduced the age of the owner of the tomb. In fact, if Keys was gifted, he estimated that even if the Slad Lord Zoo and could enter the ruin, it would have been crushed by the chaotic force field the moment it entered and turned into a pile of paste. The ancient tomb of the strength dragon that he found might have turned into a new tomb immediately. After the death of the strength dragon, every bit of its flesh and blood turned into the purest force field energy that filled the tomb. The young blue dragon braced himself and activated his adaptive ability. He relied on his own body to absorb the enormous force field energy bit by bit. After that, he regained the ability to move. That was close. Keys seemed to have been frozen for 2 days. After he was freed, he immediately said this sentence. From this, it could be seen that this strength energy dragon graveyard had frightened him quite a bit. Even though the power dragon did not make any special arrangements to prevent certain existences from robbing the tomb before its death, the death of the legendary Megalosaurus itself was actually a great horror. Then the question was, how did the power dragon die? After searching the ruins for a long time, Keys could not find even a single piece of jewelry that the Megalosaurus naturally stored. It was as if the power energy dragon had hastily created a tomb for itself. It was truly strange. The reason Keys came to the Star Boundary was to find an opportunity for him to evolve to a new age, so he didn't give up easily. In the end, he finally found a palm-sized piece of metal underneath the strength dragon skeleton. The young blue dragon lifted the metal sheet in front of his eyes as if he was picking up sand. Surprisingly, although he didn't know what material this piece of metal was made of, it seemed to be very tough and hard. Even when Keys scratched it with his claws, there were no scratches on it. It was as flexible as a piece of paper. Silver magic words flowed slowly on the surface as if they were alive. Although the surface of this piece of metal was very small, there was a huge amount of information hidden in it. Every time Keyes read a page, the words would rotate and shift on the page, reorganizing the content of the next page. This thing can't be a resist color scroll, right? Quest observed it carefully and suddenly came to a realization. However, he didn't know that the color-resistant scroll was not invented by the color resistance people, but a treasure that they found in a ruin. The real creator of the scroll might be someone from the Saruk sorcerer clan that was even more ancient than the ancient times. The purpose of the sorcerer clan's creation of these scrolls was not to increase the strength of the reader, although knowledge is power, but to use it as a medium to preserve some of the secrets that were passed down from the ancient times. Later, these scrolls were also spread out from the sorcerer clan and fell into the hands of other clans. Keyes didn't know that the piece of metal he found was actually snatched by the power dragon when it was young. The content recorded on it was the secrets of the megalosaurus that the power dragon had recorded. Indeed, in the multiverse, the megalosaurus was actually a relatively ancient race, and in the myths of many planes, this creature played the role of the creator. But in fact, the megalosaurus was actually not that ancient. Compared to some of the true ancient races, the megalosaurus was still very young. However, those ancient races had basically been wiped out, and the ones who wiped them out were the megalosaurus. Although there were now various kinds of megalosaurus that were widely distributed in various planes of the multiverse, this was not the result of natural evolution or migration. According to the records of a scroll that Keyes found, the megalosaurus were distributed to various planes of the multiverse in an instant at a certain point in time in ancient times. Just like the description of the sorcerer clan quoted by the power dragon, a meteorite as tall as a mountain fell from the sky, bringing a great disaster. Then from the scars on the ground, a large number of winged reptiles emerged. They are somewhat similar to our race, and their bodies are also distributed with scales, but I can guarantee that this is not the creation of the sorcerer clan. They are called megalosaurus. They are killers. They are the destroyers of the world. That's right. In that instant, the megalosaurus great spread that affected the entire multiverse was completed. Not long after the dust settled, the megalosaurus race had challenged other ancient civilizations. Relying on their natural powerful strength, the megalosaurus destroyed countless ancient civilizations and even completely wiped out the history of their existence. At that time, there was no distinction between the Pinochet dragons and the metallic dragons. Regardless of good or evil, all megalosaurus were carrying out the two different world-destroying operations of challenging and destroying. Of course, the megalosaurus were not destroying the multiverse, and they did not really want to destroy the world. The reason why they carried out the operation of destroying the ancient civilization was actually because they were obeying the will of the nine-faced dragon god Io to spread the megalosaurus race to various planes and to reproduce. And objectively speaking, after the cleanup of the megalosaurus, while the ancient civilization withdrew from the stage of the multiverse's history, it also provided an opportunity for other younger races to be born and develop. Take the world of Toril as an example. If the megalosaurus had not destroyed the empire built by the sorcerer clan, and with its custom of raising other intelligent creatures as sacrificial food, the humans and elves would not have been able to develop their own civilization. Similarly, the Churut pantheon that worshipped the ancient dinosaur gods was also driven away from the center of the world of Toril because of the sudden appearance of the megalosaurus race. Chapter 9:36. Keyes did not expect that he would be able to discover the secrets of the dragons that have been sealed in the multiverse for many years in the tomb of the power dragon. After the nine-faced dragon god, Io gradually faded out of the belief of the megalosaurus race, the platinum dragon god Bahamut and the Pinochet dragon queen Tiamat took over. The truth about the history of the megalosaurus was rarely spread among the dragons. Other than that, when Keyes finished reading the gold leaf that he thought was a color-resistant scroll, some of the information recorded in it revealed the real reason for the death of the primordial power dragon. He actually died because he failed to ascend to godhood. As one of the three legendary megalosaurus, the power dragon, the pinochet dragon, and the metallic dragon were like little brothers to them. However, in the multiverse, the more powerful a species was, the smaller its population would be. Indeed, many naturalists in the multiverse believe that the reason why Bahamut and Tiamat were stuck at mid-tier divine power and could not ascend to greater divine power was because the population of the metallic dragon and the pinochet megalosaurus was too small. Compared to the millions of followers of the gods of other races, the number of followers of the two megalosaurus gods was actually quite poor. However, even so, they were still much stronger than the power dragon. In the entire multiverse, the population of the power dragon was not more than 100. Many naturalists doubted that, and those scholars were inclined to deny it. The power dragon wanted to ascend to godhood with such a small population. It was no different from a fool's dream. Therefore, in order to complete the transformation to the next level, he could only find another way. The power dragon wanted to get rid of the shackles of the power of faith and become an origami, ancient god, that represented some objective law of the multiverse, and then obtain a divine title. And the direction he chose was the power dragon that was related to his own talent. Although he had lived to the level of the primordial dragon and had the ability to transform into a force field, in order to better understand the law, the power dragon still spent a lot of effort to find treasure. He found the gravitational slingshot used by the nine-faced dragon god, Io, when he spread the megalosaurus race to various planes of the multiverse. However, this artifact was missing a component called the assembly gate. The latter is the aiming correction device of the gravitational slingshot, which is not completely correct. However, at that time, the gate of assembly had not yet been mastered by Yinagu, the Knoll god. The previous owner of this item was Ma Yuan, the god slayer. Because it knew that it was no match for Ma Yuan, the power dragon gave up on the idea of seizing it by force. However, he did not give up on the idea of using the gravitational slingshot to study the law of force. Perhaps it was due to its confidence in its racial talent. The power energy dragon actually entered the gravitational slingshot without the calibration of the assembly gate and activated it. And this was the reason for his death. After the gravitational slingshot was activated, the force field energy contained within became even more complicated and chaotic. In the beginning, the strength energy dragon was still able to use its own ability to mediate the situation. But in the end, he became increasingly powerless and was finally torn to pieces by the gravitational force. The flesh and blood of the power energy dragon that was stripped by the chaotic gravitational force accumulated layer by layer on the gravitational slingshot over thousands of years, turning into rocks that wrapped around the artifact. Only then did it stop working. The Kuiper belt that Key saw around this ruin before was actually formed by the gravitational force emitted by the gravitational slingshot, which attracted the matter in the astral world. In the gold foil, Keys found the spell to control the gravitational slingshot that the power energy dragon discovered and dismantled this artifact from its sealed state. To be safe, the young blue dragon also gritted his teeth and swallowed the flesh and bones of the power energy dragon that had turned into rocks into his stomach, and used his active adaptive ability to digest them. The purpose of doing this was to at least ensure that he had the same ability to control the force field as the ancient power energy dragon. At least he would not be unable to control the gravitational slingshot that had been shut down. The shape of this gravitational slingshot, in Keyes' opinion, was similar to the armillary sphere. It was cast from an unknown magic metal. Not only the surface, but even the core of the metal material was engraved with complex rune magic circles. In order to explore its essence, the young blue dragon also transformed into a quantum form for some research. As a result, the name gravity of this gravitational slingshot was actually quite conservative. It might be related to the four fundamental forces. The reason why the ancient power energy dragon could not lose control of it after it was activated was probably because of this reason. Therefore, after realizing this, even if it was clear that this gravitational slingshot was the key to breaking through the age level, Keyes did not follow the example of the unlucky power energy dragon and activate it. Instead, he turned to look for the Gate of Assembly and wanted to recombine the two artifacts to form a complete artifact. Fortunately, the Gate of Assembly had now changed owners. Compared to snatching it from the hands of the terrifying god-slayer of ancient times, it was undoubtedly much easier to snatch this artifact from the Knoll god Yenig. It was precisely because of this that the scale of perpetual order was designed to trick the demon lord into the material plane and then trick him into opening the Gate of Assembly to mobilize an army to attack the Medici Empire. North of Bite City, in the distant sea 300 parsangs away, the Megalosaurus, whose head was the size of a small island, only showed the surface of the sea. It spoke to the few people who stepped on the sea in the soul language. The Medici Empire is only in name, and the Ash World, as the main world of the scale of perpetual order, no longer has any shackles. The Khedive enclaves scattered overseas are the last of our troubles, and now it's time to remove them all. Just like the battle against the Sirs in the realm of Ether, I will carry out the first wave of attacks, and then we will kill them all. After that, Keyes dived into the depths of the ocean and swam to the Archipelago province, which was the closest to the coast of the Medici Empire. After finding the Gate of Assembly, he could not wait to combine the two artifacts into one, so that he could jump to a higher age level. The reason why he still wanted to go to war now was that he had not shown up for a long time, and he wanted to contribute to the development of the Chamber of Commerce out of guilt. He really had a conscience. In the afternoon, the sun was scorching. The warships of the scale of perpetual order gathered again, and the Nufman Dis changed from an airship to a flagship, sitting in the center of the fleet. The main island of the Archipelago province was not far in front of them. The sea breeze blew from the horizon, and every crew member felt a chill on their faces. If they looked to the west, they would see a mass of dark clouds rolling on the horizon in the distance, as if the sky was swollen with a large bruise. The warships lined up and rushed to the main island. At this moment, the dark clouds had climbed into the sky, and the cold wind blew the flags on the ships like long hair. Under the dark clouds, the sky was a misty green, flickering. Chapter 9:37. Archipelago Province, Main Island City. In such a city where everyone knew how to row a boat, boarding a boat, and setting sail, crossing from land to sea was a completely unconscious act. It was as easy as crossing the threshold of one's own home. Ferrying across the canal, rowing to the small islands near the main island, drifting in the Erie Lagoon at night, fully armed fleets going to the battlefield in the deafening sound of horns, large sailing merchant fleets sailing to the Golden Horn Bay or other enclaves of Bite City, according to the season. These were the profound and recurring experiences of the people of Archipelago Province, and they were their daily lives. Sailing, adventure, profit, and honor were the guides to the life of Archipelago people. Sailing was their livelihood. For nearly 1,000 years, they had no other way of life. The sea protected them, provided them with opportunities, and determined their fate. The hidden waterways and dangerous beaches were natural barriers. Therefore, the city had always been safe, and no invaders could enter this place. Even during the decades of war between Zagan Pasha, who was later enfeoffed as Khedive, but Archipelago people still like to use the original title of Pasha to refer to the noble family hereditary here, and the sons of the Khalil family. The main island city of Archipelago Province was never approached by the enemy. Those lousy sailors who couldn't even count the number of sail ropes couldn't find a safe waterway to the main island. Of course, in recent decades, the main island city had also undergone some changes. It gradually evolved from an island city full of pirates and merchants to a commercial transit center. It began to provide shelter from wind and rain for ships carrying goods from various ports of the Medici Empire, various overseas enclaves, and distant Yinching. Wood, cotton, metal, weapons, seeds, and spices were transported back and forth through these coastal ports. Various stories, inventions, and ideas were also spread on the ships. It's amazing A scholar who had visited the main island city once said, "This place is isolated overseas, but pepper, cloves, pine, black oil, and pink rock salt, which are only produced in the south of Medici, are actually in large quantities here." In order to create a better commercial transit center, the archipelago province built new cities on many of its subsidiary islands. New cities rose from the water one after another, as if they had been magically created from the swamp. They were built on the foundations of oak piles that had sunk deep into the mud. They seemed to be in a precarious situation, but in fact, they were as stable as old trees. As the capital of the archipelago province, the main island city was no exception. Based on the original old city, several new cities were built on the main island. These cities appeared to be very fragile in the face of the unpredictable sea. However, these cities produced nothing except mullet, eels, and salt pans by the sea. There was no wheat or wood, and meat was scarce. They had to rely on the support of the old city district and imports from other places. In case of famine, the city would be extremely vulnerable. Its only function was to sail and to transport goods, so the quality of the ships was of great importance. In the new district of the main island city, the shipyard that occupied the largest area was supervised by the Zagan family. Many of the islanders, who were unable to go out to sea because of their weak health or because they did not have the means, could only come to the factory to work for a living. In addition, this factory also recruited craftsmen from all over the Ashen world. It was even rumored that there were some workers from other planes in the factory. 5 barrels of tar blocks, all of which are purchased from the shipyard. In a small alley behind the shipyard, a man dressed as a boatman was pulling a flatbed cart with 5 large barrels on it. He was in the middle of a transaction with a customer. The lowest price is 20 silver cats. The person who traded with him had a shaved head and was more than 6 wrists tall. His sideburns were covered with a full beard, and his face was covered with deep wrinkles due to years of erosion by the sea breeze. He wore a sleeveless sharkskin armor, a linen shirt and pants, and a pair of sealskin boots. Almost without thinking, in the eyes of an expert, this man looked like a master who made a living with knives on the sea, which was also commonly known as a pirate. It was not the first time that Nauman had played the role of a pirate, so he would not give himself away. "Can it be cheaper?" Nauman bargained. Even if the other party said, "The lowest price is 20 silver cats," if he did not bargain, it would be a sign of cowardice. After all, who would believe that a person who was used to doing business without any capital would not bargain when buying things? The man who sold him the goods gave Nauman a sidelong glance. "Brother, I think you are a sensible man. The backup materials in the shipyard are all first-class goods. Just these 5 barrels of tar blocks, you can buy them back and melt them, and use them to smear a 3-masted ship. It's only 20 silver cats. You will not lose out, and you will not be cheated. You will definitely get a good deal. Buy them, leave him the gold, and see if he can catch a rat hole." A voice rang in Nauman's mind. It was none other than Keys, who was lurking in the sea outside the main island of the archipelago province, who sent him a message. Since he had already informed the higher-ups of the Chamber of Commerce that he was going to launch the first wave of attacks, the young blue dragon would naturally take action. Of course, he did not want to sink the entire archipelago province. Instead, he wanted to solve some hidden problems for the scale of perpetual order, who would soon occupy this place. If the drows who were hiding in the archipelago province were allowed to stay here, they would definitely attract a bigger disaster in the future. Therefore, Keys's first wave of attack was targeted at the rats. The young blue dragon wanted to fill the hole with water. And in order to accurately fill the entire archipelago province with water, the first thing to do was to find the location of the rat hole. That was why he sent the best pirate spy in the scale of perpetual order to fish in the shipyard of the new city on the main island. The drows had already infiltrated this industry. Although on the surface, as the Zagan family had arranged many professionals in charge of accounting, they were unable to embezzle the profits of the shipyard on a large scale. However, it was easy for them to support some channels to resell the shipyard materials to make a profit. Moreover, Keys also knew that the drows were now in shortage of gold. The gold reserves in the Ash world were not high, and most of it was controlled by the scale of perpetual order, who had seized the wealth of the great dimensional kingdom. The same was true for the gold that flowed in from other planes. Many of the magic items and weapons of the Drows were made of adamantine. Their daily repairs and manufacturing also required adamantine as a magical metal, and in order to make adamantine, they had to have gold as a raw material. Previously, the Drows had played tricks in Spat City and wanted to buy a batch of gold, but in the end, they were intercepted and confiscated by the scale of perpetual order. Therefore, their gold shortage had become more and more serious. And it was because of this that Keyes wanted to use gold to carry out a fishing operation to find the hiding location of the rat hole. Chapter 9:38. Deal. After haggling for a long time, Naman finally reluctantly accepted the old boatman's offer and took out his wallet. 2 gold drogs, equal to 20 silver cats. He took out a few pieces of cut gold coins and handed them over. The boatman looked at Naman with a puzzled look. It was not that he had never seen a customer pay with a gold dagger before, but it was the first time that he had seen a coin with such high purity like Naman's. Although it looked like it had been cut, its purity could not be faked. This is, after hesitating for a moment, the old boatman swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He had already seen that Naman was doing business at sea without any capital, so he did not want to cause trouble. The money and goods were settled, and Naman wheeled the flatbed cart away along the narrow road that ran through the alleyway. The old boatman glanced at his back and turned around to return to the shipyard. Not long after, the man appeared in a small building in the factory. It's real gold drogs, full gold. A man wearing a dark, gray hooded robe took the golden drow spear fragment that had just been traded from the old boatman. It was unknown what method he used, but he quickly made a judgment. He raised his head, revealing his face under the visor, and asked in a strangely accented Medi language, "Are you sure that man is a pirate leader in the city?" Yes, that man was introduced by Cripple Jack. He must be an old bandit in the main island city for some time, otherwise Jack would not have introduced him. The old boatman thought for a moment and continued, "Sir, I also heard something. Recently, it is said that the scale of perpetual order found a vault in an overseas colony of the Wozang Empire. There is a small amount of gold stored in it. They melted it into gold drogs on the spot. They originally wanted to use the money to purchase a batch of goods in the territories of several Khedive. But who would have thought that the merchant ship transporting the gold drogs would be intercepted by a group of pirates halfway, and the money was lost?" Hearing this, the man whose face was hidden by the helmet and hood immediately raised a finger and covered his mouth. "This matter is very complicated. You already know too much. Take your share of the money." He pulled out a machete from his waist and divided the broken pieces of the golden Drogo spear into 2 piles, one big and one small. "Watch your mouth, or you won't live long." Seeing this, the old boatman immediately shut his mouth. He reached out and took the 2 pieces of gold, which were about a quarter of the size of a jean jouageux, and hurriedly walked out of the small building. "This is really awkward. Hiding the head and showing the tail is really not my style." After the boatman left, there were no more outsiders in the small building. Jarlaxle then tore off his robe. He appeared to be a bravado. There was no other word to describe him better. Most dark elves, especially males of low status, were usually quiet and wore practical clothing, such as a black robe decorated with spider or cobweb patterns, or a simple short-sleeved shirt under a soft chain armor. Furthermore, regardless of gender, dark elves usually wore pawavis, a dark cloak that allowed them to hide from their enemies, for camouflage. Jarlaxle was not like that. His hair was carefully trimmed, and after taking off his robe, he could not wait to put on a somewhat pompous wide-brimmed hat. The hat was decorated with an emerald bird's huge feather. Then, he put on a shimmering cloak. Whether it was in the light or in the infrared part of the spectrum that dark elves could see with their thermal eyes, one could see that the cloak was flashing with various phosphorescent lights. His sleeveless vest was cut very short to show off his strong abdominal muscles. He also wore various rings, necklaces, bracelets, and even ankle bracelets. All of these jingled. Of course, only when the dark elf wanted them to jingle. Otherwise, they would not make a sound. Men, Jarlaxle pondered for a moment and then ordered. Soon, more than a dozen figures of different heights ran out from all over the small building and quickly gathered in his room. Find out the background of that pirate. Unlike his exaggerated appearance, Jarlaxle was actually a very calm dark elf. Otherwise, he would not have been able to live peacefully for so long. First, make sure that they did not go out to sea to rob recently. Then, find out where the pirate is hiding and where he hides his money. After saying this, he shut his mouth. In the blink of an eye, he was the only one left in the room. After everyone left, Jarlaxle turned his head and walked to a closet in the room. He casually pushed it open, revealing a staircase that seemed to lead to the depths of the underground. As this small building was originally a dormitory for the nobles of the Zagan family, the craftsmen dug a basement as a wine cellar when they built it. After Jarlaxle occupied this place, he renovated the basement and expanded it many times. He also dug out many secret passageways that connected to his various strongholds. Even the rabbit knew to prepare 2 more caves for himself. How could Jarlaxle, who was more cunning than a fox, not think of this? He walked along the staircase to the basement and hesitated for a moment in front of 2 secret doors with different runes engraved on them. Then, he chose the secret door with an 8-clawed spider hanging on the door as a disguise and chanted the incantation to open it. There were magic traps on these secret doors. If an ignorant person carelessly pushed the door, it would immediately be triggered. Not only would the door pusher be attacked, but the maze would also collapse and be sealed. After chanting the incantation, Jarlaxle lifted the tapestry and entered a newly opened passageway. When no one was paying attention, this guy could finally use his ability at will. As if he had transformed into a breeze, he quickly passed through the long secret passageway and entered a cave that seemed to have been formed naturally. As soon as he entered, Jarlaxle quickly drew his sword from his waist. Clang! The sound of metal colliding echoed in the cave. Kiki, treacherous laughter suddenly rang out. Little traitor, your vigilance is not bad. It's no wonder you're still alive despite not being favored by the great Spider Queen like that jurist. Along with these words, a huge figure suddenly appeared in the dark elf's infrared vision. It was a demon-hunting spider. It was called Uthu. If anyone had some understanding of the spider webs on the 66th floor of the Abyss, they would most likely have heard of this name. When Lolth declared war on a certain prime material plane, she would first send her own herald, this glib-tongued, demon-hunting spider Uthu, relying on its race's innate ability to warp to the place. After arriving at the destination, this spider creature would do its best to make itself known to many civilians. It would announce the imminent arrival of the Spider Queen, and at the same time use its sharp claws to pierce the panicked civilians. Apart from that, because most demon-hunting spiders would directly attempt to destroy any other demons, Lolth liked to send the obedient Uthu to the palaces of other demon lords to carry out diplomatic missions. The Spider Queen felt that its appearance alone was enough to make some of the lower demons in the opposing camp uneasy, which might give her the upper hand in the future. This multi-legged envoy loved to enjoy these opportunities. It would always unreservedly belittle the status and power of demons, at the same time reminding them of Lolth's identity as a goddess and her influence in the mortal kingdoms of the prime material plane. It was the same when facing demons, and it was the same when facing mortals. However, Jarlaxle rolled his eyes when he heard the spider's laughter. If this demon-hunting spider was more knowledgeable, it would be able to decipher the meaning behind those eyes. Idiot 13-inch. Unfortunately, its knowledge was limited. Let me give you a word of advice, Jarlaxle said. Whether or not you meet me in the future, don't laugh like that. It's inauspicious. Chapter 9:39. After listening to Jarlaxle's advice, Gashu, the demon-hunting spider, laughed even harder. Not only were the 6 abdomen legs dancing, but the 2 front legs with sharp blades were also flying up and down. It was obvious that it did not take the dark elf's words seriously. Little drow, just mind your own business. Do I need you to worry about my business? The demon-hunting spider's mouth part moved and naturally made a gia sound. Jarlaxle shrugged his shoulders. Forget what I said. However, the dark elf mercenary leader suddenly changed the topic. The matter of gold has been settled. Today, I found a very likely way to obtain a large amount of gold. In the darkness, Gash's 8 compound eyes lit up with blue light. The demon-hunting spider was very interested in what Jarlaxle said. After all, this was related to the task assigned to it by the Spider Queen. A group of pirates from the Archipelago province happened to rob a merchant ship under the scale of Perpetual Order 2 days ago. There were a small number of newly smelted gold drow daggers on the ship. Of course, the small number I said was for the rich Chamber of Commerce. Because of that, they may not have sent a warship or a Leviathan airship to transport it. For other forces, including drow wanderers like us, the amount of gold is actually considerable. If we find this batch of gold, not to mention making some fine gold ingots to make magic items and weapons, at least repairing the existing inventory is absolutely no problem. Gashu heard this and jumped to the dome of the cave with a few abdomen legs. Just like some people like to pace when they were thinking, this demon-hunting spider also liked to climb on the ceiling or wall when it was thinking about a problem. Do you know about Yinagu? That old dog came to this material plane 2 days ago with a lot of puppies. Gashu did not comment on Jarlaxle's statement. Instead, he asked a question that seemed to be somewhat irrelevant. The dark elf mercenary leader nodded. The news of the Knoll God's defeat and escape had already spread throughout the Ash world. There was no need to hide it from the demon-hunting spider. His Majesty had great ambition but little talent. He wanted to occupy this world, but he failed in vain. In the end, he even benefited the megalosaurus behind the scale of Perpetual Order. Everyone knows about this. The demon-hunting spider suddenly fell from the ceiling of the cave. Its 6 legs smashed into the ground, deeply embedded into the rocks. Then do you know that when he returned to the bottomless abyss, his first stop was the spider magic web? Is he still venting his anger there? Jarlaxle looked hesitant. He really did not know about this. He knows about His Majesty Roth's plan? I don't know. Gash's words had a double meaning. In an instant, there was no more sound in the cave. A dark elf and a demon-hunting spider, 2 eyes against 8, stared at each other in silence. Jingle. The J bracelet on Jarlaxle's wrist vibrated slightly. My people have found the pirate's lair. If you don't go, then I can only send the group of wandering drows to get it. You know who those people listen to? Gashu sneered again. It's just that little lass, Lavis. Although she is quite accomplished in the way of betrayal, she was born into the spider magic web. So are you going or not? Jarlaxle asked directly, ignoring the demon-hunting spider's derogatory remarks about the wandering drows. The demon-hunting spider was still not angry. It was completely different from its kind, which was irritable and easily angered. It replied with a smile, "Of course I'm going. Why not? The drows should know that what you seek is given by the goddess. How can you get it by yourself?" Hearing its words, Jarlaxle left the cavern without looking back. He followed the secret passage back to his small building. Gashu, who had a keen sense of hearing, heard Jarlaxle complaining as he walked. Naggy and cheap talker. Another idiot who seeks his own death. The demon-hunting spider cackled again. However, if one listened carefully, they would find that its laughter was much colder than before. The fleet of the scale of Perpetual Order was approaching the main island. Although the family of the late Zagankadive and his supporters had jointly issued a notice that the main island was impregnable, and there was a secret waterway blocking the enemy's fleet from approaching the shore, the people in the city were still in a state of panic. After all, if those people were really confident, they wouldn't have sent out a notice and sent people to secretly communicate with their acquaintances who had business dealings with the scales of Eternity Chamber of Commerce. The main island was only so big, and this kind of thing couldn't be hidden at all. Now, many sea merchants and families on the island had begun to buy cotton cloth. It was said that they wanted to make some flags embroidered with the pattern of the scale of Perpetual Order overnight. If the army really attacked the city, it would be more or less useful to hang the flag at the door. Of course, most of the people who were worried about these big things lived in the old city of the main island, and each of them had a family and a business. The people who lived in the new city were relatively less worried, because they were not qualified to be worried. Most of them were sailors or craftsmen in the shipyards, and the worst of them were sea bandits who hid their identities and went ashore to rest. So what if the scale of perpetual order came? They still had to live their lives. The songs on the ships were still singing, and the factories were still operating. At worst, they would stop their business and start anew. How careless! Naaman, who was hiding in a big house supported by oak stakes in a coastal beach among a group of pirates, could not help but sigh in his heart when he saw that they were still yelling at him. He disguised himself as a pirate, and it could be said that he did not even need to act. The contract demon just changed his figure and used a little magic to affect the minds of some pirates, and they treated him as one of their own. He had only been here for half a day, but he had already become an old bird. The tar he traded in the afternoon had been placed in the warehouse. Tomorrow morning, it would be taken to a private dock for maintenance of a few small warships. The contract demon's bait was now bitten by a big fish. The somewhat vulgar sneer suddenly sounded out of thin air, and Naaman's ears perked up. However, the other pirates present all acted as if nothing had happened. The sound of dice colliding with each other and people shouting covered the laughter well. When Gashu arrived, the pirates were still indulging in fooling around. As a result, they did not make any effective resistance at all. They were all killed by the poisonous fog released by the demon-hunting spider. Everyone's face was blue and purple before they died, and they were obviously tortured to death by the poison. The mortals are really... Hey! A voice suddenly sounded and interrupted the demon-hunting spider's complacency. Chewing on the licorice detoxification pill made by the potion master of the scale of perpetual order, Puwu, the demon-hunting spider's poison was still quite strong, and ordinary Batsu could not withstand it. Naaman walked out from behind the pillar and greeted it. Didn't anyone tell you? Don't laugh like that, because... Just as the other party was confused by his words, Naaman threw a small hammer at the demon-hunting spider without any regard for martial ethics. This hammer, which looked no different from the claw hammer used by the craftsman, was the hammer that Keys temporarily lent to him. It was a super war hammer with a complete mice nucleus inlaid in it. You'll die. Chapter 940. Thunderbolt, raging fire, astral wind, acid corrosion, frost, all the terrible damage that Gashu could recognize were all contained in this simple throw of the hammer. Unfortunately, there were many things that it couldn't recognize. Bang! The demon-hunting spider's elephant-like body was like a ragbag at this time. It was smashed away by the hammer. When it fell to the ground, it was obviously a lamp that had run out of oil. It exhaled more than it inhaled. Its whole body was mottled, and the bristles that were like razors were gone. Its internal organs were squeezed into powder, mixed with dirty blood, and flowed out in large amounts. This appearance was 70 to 80% similar to the prey that had injected venom after hunting so that it could suck and swallow. What are you doing? I am the envoy of Her Majesty, Queen of Spiders Lolth. If you dare to kill me, you will forever fall into the spider web of the bottomless abyss and suffer the pain of being bitten by thousands of spiders. Gashu looked at Naaman, who was walking towards it step by step, and shouted fiercely. However, when it used its only remaining eye to use a unique observation method to try to see Naaman's whereabouts, it was not stupid enough to think that Naaman was an ordinary mortal after being smashed to death by a hammer. The threatening words came to an abrupt end. Why did you stop, little spider? In Gashu's perspective, where are the pirates and bandits? The guy who was walking towards, it was clearly a batsuit devil who used some unknown method to transform into a human form and cleverly concealed its breath. After the devil died, it would either completely fall or return to the 9 prisons of Bader. Even if it really fell into the bottomless abyss after death, this kind of traitor would probably be rewarded by the abyss will. After all, rare things were precious, and a devil that fell into the bottomless abyss was definitely a rare thing. Seeing that Gashu was no longer talking nonsense, Naaman didn't continue to ridicule it. Just now, he used the magic hammer that was comparable to an artifact to hit it, and it was all thanks to keys. Otherwise, Hammer would not listen to his orders. The contract demon knew his own strength. If they really fought face to face, the contract demon might not be able to defeat the demon-hunting spider. After all, it was not an ordinary demon-hunting spider. You are the envoy of the Spider Queen. Why are you hanging out with those blasphemous priests and wandering drow? They're all people who betrayed the goddess Lolth, Naaman asked seriously. Contract demon vaguely sensed that there was something fishy about this matter. However, Gasha did not dare to talk nonsense now. Considering that Yinagu, the Knoll god, could descend to the Ashen world and the Queen of Spiders could make arrangements in advance, he thought that the contract demon in front of him might be a spy of a demon king in the 9 prisons of Bader. Originally, it had thought that being able to come to the material plane and act like a tyrant was a good job. However, the current situation wasn't as simple as losing 9 out of 10 lives. If it was really involved in the schemes of the lower planes, a tiny demon-hunting spider, like it would only end up dead. I'll ask you one last time. Are you going to tell me your mission? Naaman narrowed his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Don't say that I didn't warn you in advance. If you still refuse to tell the truth, you'll end up in a miserable state. In a mansion in the main island city, Jarlaxle took off his top hat with a kingfisher feather and put it in the crook of his arm. He stared at the graceful figure in front of him with a peaceful gaze. Good day, noble Lady Lavis. May you not be troubled by the vicious fireball. Jarlaxle greeted faintly. On the bed in front of him, a female drow was lying on the bed. She had just escaped from Bite City. Nominally, this mansion was a golden house for Zagankadive to hide his mistress, but in fact, it was one of the few important strongholds of the wandering drow on the ground. Its owner was Lavis. She was the daughter of Lolth and a handsome male drow mage. Although she was not the only descendant of the goddess who lived in the spider weave, she was definitely the most outstanding among all her siblings. Unlike the children of Lolth before she betrayed the elven divine system and had with the elven main god, Corellon, a child like Lavis, who was born after the Spider Queen fell into the abyss, could not be compared with the former. After all, Lolth's older children were all gods. However, Lavis was definitely an anomaly. She was only a little over 200 years old. In terms of the lifespan of a drow, she was still a young man, but in fact, she was already a master whose strength was infinitely close to the legendary realm. In the spiderweave plane of the abyss, Lavis not only plotted against her many siblings, but also had ambitions that were much stronger than the latter. She did not want to waste time fighting for the illusory Spider Queen's favor. Instead, she hoped to betray Lolth and take the spider weave for herself. It was said that Lavis had already roped in some low-level drow commanders to her side. Recently, she had also successfully obtained the assistance of a team of mercenaries made up of Slaw green toads. As long as she could successfully plan a large enough disturbance to give the Spider Queen an opportunity to complete the Agony of Sorrow ritual, she would be able to obtain partial control over the spider webs, and might even be able to harm the Spider Queen's origin. As a schemer who was good at acting with power and influence, there were many people who didn't feel disgusted by Lavis' cruel ambitions. They entered her lair in the dark depths of the Weave Pit and found this useful ally who could fight against Lorcy. According to some rumors, there were spies of Lavis even among the wax demons, which made her eyes and ears in the spider weave. Now, the ambitious descendant of the gods had come to the Ashen world to add the final fuse to her huge plan. Not only because the wandering drow and blasphemous priests could disrupt the situation, but also because of the situation that her mother had set up in the Ashen world. She was only waiting for the right time to ignite the many barrels of gunpowder that she had previously buried. But now, Lavis felt a little hesitant. In the past few years in the Ashen world, she had easily gained a foothold in this plane because she had become friends with the lecherous Zagankadive. But the incident in Bite City a few days ago made her feel that this plane was not as simple as she had thought. Not to mention that her backer, Zagankadive, had been plotted against and killed. After seeing the scale of perpetual order, which took less than half a day to eliminate the army of the Null God, she knew that the waters in the Ashen world were much deeper than she had expected. If she was not careful, she could be drowned in this place. So, after fleeing back to the main island, Lavis hid in her stronghold. She did not take the initiative to contact the wandering drow and blasphemous priests who had followed her lead. She also did not participate in the fight for the inheritance left behind by Zagankadive. Now, she was able to see Jarlaxle because he was a powerful legendary mercenary leader. These actions were not without caution. Chapter 941. You just here to greet me? Mr. Jarlaxle, Lavis inquired of the visitor in a languid tone. The dark elf mercenary leader bowed out of courtesy. Respected Lady Spider Queen, this humble one indeed has other matters to discuss with you this time. He took a step forward, and the bracelet on his ankle rotated slightly. A faintly discernible wave of magic rippled outwards. Lavis opened her eyelids, and her two grape-like emerald eyes emitted a dangerous light. Don't worry, I'm just worried that someone else will hear what I'm about to say, Jarlaxle explained, and then went straight to the point. The demon-hunting spider Gashu was ambushed. It's unknown whether he's dead or alive. It's no longer a secret that my race has survived and reproduced in this dimension. Hearing what he said, Lavius instantly stood up. As the child of the Spider Queen Lolth, she naturally knew what the name Gashu meant. The Mother Goddess already knows that a wandering drow tribe has taken root in the Ashen world. What did she know? When did she send that demon-hunting spider that always acts as an envoy? Is this Jarlaxle still an ally? Is there a problem with the layout of the spider magic web? A series of questions ran through Lavis' mind like a merry-go-round. At the same time, her eyes were fixed on the nominal ally in front of her. In the dictionary of the Dark Elves, any publicly declared word that was related to friend was actually synonymous with the next traitor. She was wary of the other party's sudden attack. After all, Lavis knew that although the other party was not a legendary assassin, a legendary warrior and duelist was no different from a legendary assassin at such a close distance. At least, that was the case for her. Who injured Gashu? Not to mention that it's not an ordinary demon-hunting spider. Even if it's an ordinary demon-hunting spider, is there a human in this main island that can hurt such a monster? Anyway, I haven't seen Zagan. That old guy has such a ruthless character by his side. Lavis wisely did not ask the series of questions that she had previously thought of, because those questions were basically in the past tense. So even if she knew the answer, she reckoned that there was no way she could make any arrangements in advance. Right now, the Spider Queen's daughter was more concerned about Jarlaxle's attitude. Of course, as a dark elf, she could not ask directly, so she could only beat around the bush. The question she asked just now had a deduction in it. If Jarlaxle was still on her side, then Gashu might have been the one who sent his men to kill her. Others might not know, but Lavius knew very well that with the strength of this dark elf mercenary leader, the demon-hunting spider would not be able to last more than a few rounds against him. If Jarlaxle chose to side with the Spider Queen, then he would either question her or attack her directly. However, Lavius was secretly prepared to fight back. Perhaps because he had seen through the thoughts of this noble lady of the Spider Queen, the dark elf mercenary leader let out a soft chuckle. I don't know if you're thinking too much or not. We, the drow race, usually have this kind of misconception. We always like to think of things in the direction of betrayal and conspiracy. I didn't injure Gashu, but I don't have any thoughts of harming you now. Seeing that Lavius was still hesitant, Jarlaxle said bluntly, that idiot Gashu was injured and taken away when he was robbing a group of pirates. I've already been to the pirate's nest. How should I put it? The traces of magic left in there are more effects than all of the fragments on my body. Do you understand what I mean? After running the Day Independent Mercenary Group for nearly a few hundred years, the Dark Elf Jarlaxle could be said to be extremely wealthy. Even though he was a warrior come duelist, he had quite a lot of magic items on him. The most commonly used bloody light rapier and life-stealing light sword, for enchanted throwing daggers, the ring of protection, the ring of resistance, the bracer of defense, the shawl of illusion, the gnome escape boots that was modified to be used by elves, the dimensional hat with the effect of a dimensional bag, the belt, similar to a belt with many pockets, the burning fear eye mask, the fireball, necklace, the mage killer short staff. These were some of the magic items that Lavius had either inquired about or recognized by herself. In addition, Jarlaxle's strange style always attracted a lot of rumors and slanders, and no one could find out the truth. Therefore, perhaps he actually had more magic items. Jarlaxle had always been very conceited about his ability to accumulate so many treasures. To be able to make him admit his inferiority, one could imagine how rich the traces of magic in the pirate's nest were. And from what he said, it didn't seem to be the work of a powerful spellcaster. The demon-hunting spider, Gashu, being injured might be the result of someone using a large number of magic items at once. In other words, Gashu was defeated by money. You mean that the old spider was taken away by the people of the scale of perpetual order? Lavius thought of the answer in a flash. After living in the Ash world for some years, Lavius was very clear that when it came to the word rich and imposing, if the scale of perpetual order claimed to be second, then no one in this material plane would dare to claim to be first. And to use a large number of magic items in the main island city instead of directly injuring the demon-hunting spider with their own strength. And more importantly, to be able to take it away. This meant that the Chamber of Commerce already had a lot of people with average strength, but with great treasures, who had already infiltrated the main island city. The identity of such people could basically be confirmed as spies or secret agents. Since she had already thought of this, she could think more. Had the other party already found the traces of the wandering drows? While the Spider Queen's forces and Lavius were playing tricks, did they also fall into the trap of the Chamber of Commerce? Considering the sudden appearance of the Knoll god Yinagu, the sudden fall of the Medici Empire's Pharaoh Mako, and the approach of the scale of Perpetual Order's army to the main island city, Lavius suspected that the other party had entered the stage of closing the net, and the prey caught in the net was very likely to be the wandering drows and herself. At this moment, the ambitious daughter of the Spider Queen suddenly felt a chill all over her body. Looking at the dark elf mercenary captain who came to visit her, her eyes could not help but express a kind of inquiry. Do you want to temporarily avoid the limelight? Indeed, the current situation sounds troublesome. It's better to withdraw as soon as possible. Jarlaxle expressed his agreement bluntly. However, just as Lavius slightly showed the intention to withdraw, the dark elf mercenary captain suddenly disappeared in front of her eyes. 3 ball-shaped objects fell to the ground with a clatter. Under the surprised gaze of the Spider Queen, they suddenly burst into a burst of bright light. Flash Bomb X3, another trump card that Jarlaxle did not miss. The strong light to the drows was no less than a fatal poison. Although it would not take their lives, it could temporarily make them lose the ability to resist. It was the same for the drow warriors and the drow spellcasters. Affected by the strong light, Lavius, who was a warlock and a spider mage, let out a tragic howl. The 2 spells that she secretly prepared to guard against Jarlaxle could not be cast normally. At this moment, Jarlaxle, who first used the Phantom Cloak and the Burning Eye Mask to avoid the strong light, then used the elven version of the Gnome Escape Boots to suddenly appear behind the Spider Queen. Finally, without hesitation, he stabbed the bloody rapier and the life-stealing longsword in his hands. The former was shaped like a swift sword and had the effect of bleeding enchantment. The latter was like an ordinary one-handed sword, but in fact, it was enchanted with the spell Vampiric Touch that could absorb vitality from the wounded. It was fine if he did not make a move, but once he made a move, it was fatal. Admittedly, this was very Jarlaxle. Chapter 942. Like a hot knife cutting through butter, the sanguine and life-steal swords pierced into Lavitha's back without any hindrance. The few pieces of clothing on the latter's body didn't provide any effective defense. The blade protruded out of her chest, leaving behind 2 holes in the Spider Queen's eyes. When Jarlaxle struck, he didn't forget to twist his wrist twice, crushing her internal organs. In a flash, Lavith was no longer alive. As the leader of the Dayad Independent Mercenary Group pulled out his sword, her corpse fell forward and fell onto the floor covered with a brocade carpet. After completing the assassination, Jarlaxle acted as if nothing had happened. He took out a small cylinder from his waist. He used his finger to pull the clasp at the top of the cylinder and pulled hard. Although there wasn't any special sound or light, the dark elf stood motionless on the soft couch where Lavith had been lying, as if waiting for something. After a few seconds, the sound of weapons clashing could be heard from outside the mansion. The warriors of the Dayad Independent Mercenary Group were carrying out the final cleaning work. When the sound gradually subsided, Jarlaxle wrapped himself in the phantom cloak and disappeared from the spot. On the 66th floor of the bottomless abyss, the Spiderweave Plain, a fortress was pulled by countless sparkling spider webs, as if it was suspended in the darkness of the sky or the ground. There were hundreds of drows stationed in the fortress, and some of the key paths were patrolled by spiderized drows. At the door of the most central room stood 2 muscular Glabriza guards, their eyes closed as if they were asleep. After a series of buzzing vibrations, the 2 sinister devils opened their eyes a little. They looked at each other and revealed a sinister smile. Then, they closed their eyes again, as if they had turned a deaf ear to what was happening in the room behind them. Shattered crystals shot everywhere, and a faint red viscous liquid covered the floor of the room. A naked female, drow, slowly stood up from the ground. As she gradually stood up, her mind gradually became clear, and the indistinct beast-like roars in her mouth gradually disappeared. Lavith, or more accurately, the original clone of the Spider Queen who had triggered the activation conditions of cloning and life concealment, had come alive. Jarlaxle, Lavith gritted her teeth. The first word that came out of her mouth was the name of her enemy. Death was such a painful realization. Lavius was certain that she would return the pain that the leader of the Dayad Independent Mercenary Group brought her 100-fold in the future. However, just as he was about to issue a kill order to his hidden hand in the Ashen World, a slightly cold voice suddenly sounded from beside him. "My daughter." A chill ran down Lavith's spine. "I didn't want to kill her at first," Jarlaxle said bluntly. Now, he was on the deck of a merchant ship that was sailing to the sea outside the main island. He was adjusting the ropes hanging down from the sail with skillful movements that did not match his gorgeous clothes. Understood, the one in charge of the helm was Naman, who was nearly 6 feet tall and had a shaved head. He carried a long-bladed axe on his back and wore a shark-skin jacket that the heroes of the Archipelago province loved. If she wasn't prepared to escape, I definitely wouldn't have done it. Because it was daytime, Jarlaxle wore a wide-brimmed hat with kingfisher feathers on his head and a phantom cloak made of spider silk on his back to isolate himself from the eternal blaze light that most drow felt uncomfortable with. Although that group of wandering drow are definitely not good people, their existence is the Spider Queen's Achilles heel. Jarlaxle's voice was neither fast nor slow, and he did not deliberately lower his voice. It was as if he did not care whether the other sailors on the sailboat could hear him or not. Of course, this did not mean that Jarlaxle was fearless. It was just that there was no one else on the ship other than him and Naman. This ship was a concept product recently produced by the scale of Perpetual Order. Although there were also oars protruding from both sides of the ship. In fact, only a machine burning black oil was needed to move the oars, and there was no need to use manpower to row the oars. Understood, the answer was still the same as before, but somewhat perfunctory. However, Naman was unwilling to change it, and Jarlaxle did not care. The 2 people controlled the ship and sailed all the way out of the lagoon that surrounded the inner city of the main island along the secret waterway. They could see the warships anchored in the distant sea. Those were the troops sent by the scale of Perpetual Order. They were now negotiating with the major families in the main island, including Zagan. If there were no results in 2 days, the fleet would immediately take back the archipelago province by force. The atmosphere here was like a sword that was hidden in its scabbard, but when it was unsheathed, it would shine brightly. Therefore, the merchant ships that usually came and went around the main island, even the small fishing boats that sailed out of the main island, would consciously avoid the direction of the fleet. To Jarlaxle's surprise, the small ship that he and Naman were controlling did not sail towards the scale of Perpetual Order's fleet. Instead, it took a big turn and sailed towards the wider open sea. According to the Dark Elf's knowledge, there were only 2 people on the ship, Jarlaxle and Naman. However, the ship also carried a cargo, the demon hunting spider that was almost beaten to death, on the ship. According to his previous thoughts, Naman would definitely bring Gathu to the scale of Perpetual Order for interrogation. Otherwise, he would have just killed it. There was no need to injure it severely. However, Jarlaxle was wise enough not to ask. The situation was stronger than the person. Now that Naman represented the scale of Perpetual Order, Jarlaxle did not have the capital to bargain with him. Since Jarlaxle did not ask, Naman naturally did not need to explain. The burning black oil drove the oars, and with the help of the sail, the small cargo ship sailed on the open sea at a speed that was close to the surface of the sea. After about 2 hourglasses, it gradually approached the vicinity of a towering boathouse on the sea. The so-called boathouse was actually a house built on a large wooden raft. It looked ordinary from the outside. However, on the turbulent sea, the ship did not move up and down with the current. Instead, it looked like it was rooted in the sea. When Naman steered the ship close to the ship, a centaur-like construct creature immediately picked up a thick rope on the raft and threw it to the deck of the cargo ship. Jarlaxle took the end of the rope and wrapped it around the mast under Naman's instructions to fix the ship. "Did you bring the test subject?" Naman could not help but grin when he heard the question of the great engineer on the raft. He had already begun to mourn for the demon-hunting spider named Gathu. "Don't worry, it's still alive." When he finished speaking, a centaur, an ogre with a walking stick, and a giant, wrapped in a robe, all walked out of the ship. The main researchers of the scale of Perpetual Order had all gathered here. After all, Gathu was not an ordinary demon-hunting spider. Not only was it one of the Spider Queen's exclusive pets, but it also had a strong god's favor. It was very suitable for research. Chapter 943. The night on the wooden raft was a long night for Jarlaxle. He had seen many things that he should not have experienced at his age. Having lived for nearly 400 years, this was the first time the Dark Elf had lost his composure. When he set off for the main island the next day, the Dayat Independent Mercenary Group leader had a new understanding of the word pervert in his heart. The physiological dissection that was accurate down to the millimeter, the test of the demon-hunting spider's poison resistance, the various conjectural experiments using voodoo potions to simulate body fluids, and the somewhat familiar traditional punishment in Morse Blight. Gashu had personally experienced all of the above. Of course, it was only a passive experimental subject. Originally, Jarlaxle thought that the scale of Perpetual Order had captured the demon-hunting spider to obtain some information from it. However, from the beginning to the end, other than inquiring about the demon-hunting spider's reaction to the experiment, he did not see those people seriously ask the unlucky old spider any questions. Jarlaxle, who had never been afraid to judge others with the greatest malice, even guessed that the guy named Narman had asked him to come along with them to obtain some information from him instead of Gashu. The heavens had taken pity on him. In order to find a new backer, he had indeed told them everything he knew. If those terrifying fellows had turned him into the experimental subject, he would have shouted before going up to the stage, "Whatever you want to ask, I'll tell you everything. Please feel free to use lie detection, even if you want me to swear a magic oath." As for why he did not suddenly launch an attack like when he killed Lavis, the answer was like a louse on a bald man's head. It was obvious. He had calculated that he would definitely not be able to defeat those fellows. Admittedly, he was a legendary level warrior and duelist, But those researchers in the wooden raft cabin were definitely legendary-level champions as well. Thanks to his extraordinary perception, Jarlaxle's intuition had always been accurate in this aspect. Fortunately, early the next morning, those people were still busy preparing the demon-hunting spider, Gashu, and did not have time to bother with Jarlaxle. Min, who led him here, used the cargo ship to pick up another person from who knows where and brought him back to the main island city. You can call me Keys. The young blue dragon, who had transformed into a human form once again, stood by the side of the deck and introduced himself to Jarlaxle, who was busy controlling the ropes. However, he had no intention of lending a hand. He was not as good at handling ropes as the Dark Elves. Nice to meet you. Jarlaxle nodded. In his opinion, this person might be the same as Naaman, an important spy of the scale of perpetual order. He didn't look very old. Perhaps he was a death warrior specially trained to carry out some assassination mission. Jarlaxle did not want to get too close to him, so he pretended to be focused on fiddling with a rope on the way back to the main island. He saw through him, but did not say anything. He just let him be. After all, this dark elf had now tied himself to the chariot of the scale of perpetual order, and it would be difficult for him to get off. The reason why the young blue dragon wanted to transform into a human form. In fact, Naaman had been waiting for him yesterday. After evolving into a young dragon, Keys's body had become too large, and it was difficult for him to transform into a human form. It was because he had suddenly received an edict from the 9 prisons of Bader. A powerful bat-devil had come to the Ash World and was now hiding in the main island. However, that guy probably did not know much about the young blue dragon. The edict that Keys received had the title of a small official when he first went to the 9 prisons of Bader to participate in the Blood War. Keys guessed that the other party had probably found the files from a small organization on the first level of Avernus, and then issued the edict to recruit the young blue dragon, a native of the Ash World, for help. This was not a wild guess. In terms of the bureaucratic system, there was no one in the entire multiverse who could come out of the 9 prisons of Bader. Therefore, the frequency of the files stored by the various organizations was not always very timely. Moreover, it had only been 50 years since Keys first set foot in Avernus. Compared to the long lifespan of the demons, it was actually not too long. Even though the lifespan of the Penishade dragons was not as long as that of the demons, 50 years was only enough for an ordinary blue dragon to grow into an adult. And an adult blue dragon, in the eyes of the bat-devil that had come to the Ash World, was actually just a small character that could be ordered around. Therefore, that guy issued an edict, summoning Keys to the Archipelago province to wait for orders. In fact, if it were not for the magic edict issued by that demon, which contained a trace of the dignity of the Lord of Bader, Keys would not have bothered with such a guy who used a chicken feather as an arrow. Now, not only did he have a lot of serious things to do, but he was also about to activate the newly collected gravitational slingshot in preparation for his promotion to an adult megalosaurus. Let's go and see where that guy came from, the leader of the Dark Elven mercenaries said as the cargo ship docked, and then disappeared into the crowd near the port. Quest ignored him and turned to Naaman. If it's really the kind of idiot who doesn't know what's good for him and wants to find a material plane as his dark ritual, then I'll just eat him and be done with it. Inform the fleet to attack the city. Naaman naturally had no objection to Keys' arrangement. After anchoring the ship and tying it to the iron pillars of the mooring ground, Naaman led the young blue dragon, who had transformed into a human form, to a pirate's den in the main island city. According to the edict, the senior demon who had just come to the Ash World was now hiding in that place. Although the main island city was the largest city in the Archipelago province, to be honest, in terms of the scale of the buildings, it could not be compared with some of the real big cities of the former Medici Empire. Not to mention other things, just in terms of the sewer system, the main island city was much worse. Cities like Bite City, which could accommodate nearly 1 million people, had an efficient underground sewer system as support, and there were also intricate open and underground canals in the city. In the main island city, except for an open canal, which was mainly dug to prevent sea invasion, there were no other specially built waterways in the city. On both sides of the open canal, there were a large number of tower houses, which were built with oak or beech stakes and timber brackets. In sharp contrast to the brick buildings of the big families, these houses were built with wood, which was actually the settlement area of the city's poor. The biggest pirate's den in the main island city was located here. Chapter 944. Look, carbide lamps produced by the scale of perpetual order. Essential for night ships and exploration wells. 80% new. Only 2 silver cats. Steel flintlock. 200 bullets with paper shells. Only 15 silver cats. You won't be fooled. It's cheap if you buy it. Top quality colorful blanket. It's just soaked in seawater. Big sale. 3 silver cats for a bundle. Take it or leave it. There were all kinds of goods and all kinds of hawking. This place was spontaneously set up by pirates to sell their stolen goods. The lively and bustling atmosphere made Quest feel like he had walked into the Grand Bazaar of Bite City, which gave him a special kind of intimacy. Don't be fooled by the environment here. Naaman, who was leading the way, carefully avoided a drying pole with a woolen carpet hanging out of the window of a nearby building. But in fact, when it comes to the business atmosphere here, it's definitely one of the best in the main island. Keyes nodded. While walking on the simple covered bridge made of wooden planks between the buildings, he looked at the goods sold in the stalls. It's indeed a dazzling array of goods. But there are too many fake goods. Isn't this place in full swing every day? Hearing the young Blue Dragon's question, Naaman could not help but laugh. It said that full swing is a common thing here. But no matter if it's a buyer or seller, no one dares to casually pull out a knife and start a fight. There are rules in this place. On one hand, you can't force people to buy or sell. On the other hand, you can't go back on your word. If the buyer or seller breaks the rules, there will be people here who will not let them go easily. When he said the word human, the contract demon emphasized his voice, and Quest immediately understood what he meant. Establishing rules in this evil place was indeed what the Batsid devil, who loved order by nature, liked to do. Although Naaman had not been lurking here for a long time, he was, after all, a contract demon. He had a unique way of sensing the aura of his kind. How do we find those people? As they walked, Keyes inadvertently turned around from a fork in the covered bridge and walked into a small alley between 2 buildings. Or is it that we don't even need to look for them? They will come to us. Tilting his head, the young Blue Dragon asked Naaman, who happened to be blocking the entrance of the alley, through a large gap in front of him. However, his tone was not questioning at all. Instead, it was filled with incomparable certainty. In the meantime, under the illumination of the eternal blaze, a human figure suddenly appeared in the alley out of nowhere. This human-like creature had firm gray skin. His head was very blurry, but there were still traces of a nose and 2 red eyes that seemed to be burning. The most disturbing thing about him was his evil smile. The sinister curve of his mouth seemed to be fixed, revealing a set of hard, bone-white teeth. He was an assassin. The reason why Keyes walked into the alley was because he felt that such a thing had been following him. Assassin could transform themselves into a dark and blurry form that seemed to be formed entirely of pure shadow. This was their innate spell called shadow form. In this form, the assassin would gain the ability to hide, but this form would lose its effect under the effects of sunlight or daylight. If I encounter an assassin on the road, he will definitely kill me. Keyes stared at the assassin who appeared in front of him and recited a proverb of Bader in the infernal language. The assassin's blurry face and clear smile did not seem to change at all. Naaman, who was once a contract demon, was now alarmed. He knew very well that with the young Blue Dragon present, even the incarnations of several Lords of 9 Hells would not be able to cause any trouble, let alone an assassin. However, he was still afraid because it was an instinct that came from the depths of his bloodline. According to legend, assassin were native residents of the 9 prisons of Bader. Their race's initial image was just a group of malicious and blurry shadows that possessed sentience. Asmodeus ordered these creatures to gather and then fuse them with hellfire. After being refined by fire, these essences were finally reforged into assassin demons. Even today, assassin demons were still regarded as exiles. No devil would trust them. They lived at the edge of Batsu society, secretly carrying out their master's wishes behind the scenes. There were many rumors that revolved around the assassin demons, saying that they had already broken the laws of hell. However, as a contract demon whose familiarity with the laws of hell was second only to the great devils, the lords of 9 hells and the Devil Duke, Namen knew that these rumors were just rumors. If assassin demons really broke the laws of hell, they would no longer be protected by the laws of hell. Although assassin demons belonged to Batsu, they could not summon other devils for help. According to the twisted and mysterious laws of hell, they were never included in the regulations that allowed devils to summon each other. As compensation, they were given the right to kill any devil or life without fear of punishment. Simply put, assassin demons were licensed killers, and the devils they killed could not be questioned. How could he not be afraid? Of course, Keys was not afraid of them. "What's your name?" The young blue dragon in human form looked at the assassin demon in front of him and asked in a clear voice. "Dougal." The other party replied in Infernal. Unlike the other Batsa devils, assassin fiends were not tied down by their real names, so they always used their real names when they reported their names. If one wanted to issue an assassination mission, one had to know the other party's name. "Help me kill a devil." Sure, Dougal agreed without thinking, but he still held a cold iron sword in his hand, and the blade was still vaguely pointed at Keys. "But I've already accepted a commission to kill you, 30 soul prisms. Before you die, you can tell me who you want to kill and leave me the full commission, and I promise to help you kill him." "Oh, is that so? You want to buy my life with 30 soul prisms?" "Ha ha." Keys could not help but laugh when he heard the price. "Here are 100 soul prisms." As he spoke, he did not do anything, but 3 neat stacks of 30 soul prisms appeared in front of assassin demon Dougal, and another 10 soul prisms floated in the air alone. 90 soul prisms for the life of the devil who wants to kill me. As for the other 10, I want to add a stopper and adjust your assassination mission list to the next order. Keys looked at the assassin demon and said with a smile. Unlike the soul prisms that ordinary devils could take out, Keys had participated in the Blood War for the 2nd time and was appointed as General Batsu, so he had the authority to make his own soul prisms to give out military pay. These soul prisms that he took out were all high-grade goods that he made himself, and none of them had been circulated before. The power of the soul contained in them had not been depleted at all, so their value was naturally higher. Seeing so much money, the assassin demon named Dougal's eyes suddenly lit up, and he knew that he had met a big customer. "No problem, of course, your commission will be given priority." Good heavens, everyone says that money makes the world go round, but the usually aloof assassin demon was no exception. This scene made Namen click his tongue in amazement. He also lamented the stupidity of the demon who hired assassin Dougal. Of all things, he had to compete in wealth with Keys, who had the scale of perpetual order. Wasn't he looking for death? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.